So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to. So we are back with a brand new movie on what if Naruto was stopped talking with gara, hinata and hated by Shukaku. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. It was a quiet night when it happened. Dark figures infiltrated the Hyuga compound, killing the guards and kidnapping the year-old heir. The only reason the village was alerted was that one of the guards managed to call out an alarm before his throat was vengefully slit from ear to ear. The fourth Hokage was in his tower office at the time, head bent over his desk and slowly getting his paperwork out of the way. He'd put it off throughout the week in favor of more engaging tasks, one of which involved saving Jiraiya from the wrath of the bathhouses. Again. Scattered around his desk were miscellaneous origami pieces, born of boredom and carefully folded in the process of procrastination. The entire collection would have been enough for a miniature paper menagerie, the little animals caged by steep rectangular mountains and barricaded by classified scrolls. The young Hokage smirked and shook his head as he looked at them. His secretary would probably chew him out for those later. Oh well, bit late for her to even be here. I'll have to make sure to avoid her in the morning, he thought, folding a D-class mission report into a paper airplane. The Fire Lady's latest pet, lost and retrieved, yet again. With a sigh, he launched it at the door. Only to have its flight interrupted as an Anbu materialized in its path, hitting the man's stylized panther mask. Hokage-sama, he barked, ignoring the assault upon his person. Minato's head snapped up worriedly at the Anbu's tone, ignoring his embarrassment at being caught. What's wrong, Kurihyu-san? He asked, standing up behind the desk. Rarely had he seen this level of anxiety from one of the Anbu corps. We've got trouble, sir. A Hyuga has been kidnapped, the man reported tersely. Nezumi Taiko and her squad are on their trail. She felt you had to be notified immediately. The fourth hands gripped his desk as a chill seeped into his skin. Kidnapped? By whom? Who was taken? We managed to detain one of the enemy, sir. He is currently being interrogated by Morino Ibiki. The Anbu hesitated before finishing his report. And the one who was kidnapped was my heir, Hinata. Hyuga Heishi interrupted, a dangerously frigid undertone palatable in his voice as he stormed up to the desk. Those honorless dogs have stolen my only daughter, Namikaze. I want her back. The crouching Anbu stiffened at the man's open disrespect for the Hokage, but Minato waved him down. He'd never really been one for honorifics anyway. Heishi Dono, Minato frowned, sliding around the desk to lay a hand on the other man's shoulder. Heishi Dono, don't worry, we'll get her back, he promised, nodding towards the Anbu. Taking the hint, the man bowed before departing to alert the rest of the Anbu squads. I'll say you'll get her back, Heishi hissed, reaching up to capture the fourth's wrist. She will be back before morning, or I will personally close all the Tenketsu points below your belt line, he threatened lowly. At once, Minato winced sheepishly as he backed away from the angry man, squeezing his legs together discreetly. I'll go out myself, he promised. Carefully, he steered the older man into a chair in front of his desk. For now though, why don't you sit down, try to relax, and give us a chance to find little Hinata, all right? He said calmly, passing the man what was left of his long cold tea. Hiashi's fingers closed around the cup reflexively. Namikaze, how the hell do you think I can relax right now? Heishi snapped, only to notice that he was alone in the office. Idiot. But Hokage-sama, you need to stay here, protested a Chunin, scrambling to stay up with the young man as he marched towards the door. There is no way that I am going to let these people get away with kidnapping one of our own. A child, no less. The man snapped as he threw open the doors. He glanced back towards the stairs, and a wry grin jerked his lips for all of a second. And frankly, faced between foreign ninja and a very pissed Hyuga Heishi, I'd rather face the ninja. Outside, he looked back at the young academy instructor as he placed a hand on a small seal on the side of the Hokage tower. I need you to watch the tower for me. If any of the ambassadors from the cloud show up, I need you to delay them until I get back, he ordered. After a second's pause, he added softly, and sent someone to check on my son. Young Amino is a good babysitter, but I want to make sure they're all right. Knowing that there was no way to reason with the young Cage at this point, the Chunin saluted resignedly. Yes sir, he said. Nodding, the blonde quickly went over the possible locations of the kidnappers. It was too much of a coincidence that this occurred the week that ambassadors from Cloud were here in Fire Country to talk of a possible treaty. Thinking along those same lines, then most likely the kidnappers were heading back to Lightning Country. Which means I want the seal in the northeast point of the forest, Minato thought as he activated his jutsu, the Hiraishin. In a flash of yellow light, he disappeared. Only to reappear miles outside of Konohagakure, kunai out, and ready to fight. Luckily, or unluckily, he was in the middle of the kidnappers. On alert, The man flashed into the Shunshin, weaving in and out of the mystery ninja like a vengeful wraith. The enemy barely knew what hit them before their comrades began to fall apart around them. One ninja watched in horror as the head of his partner slid from his neck with a sickening plop, blood spurting weakly from his neck as his body slowly crumbled to the ground. Too late, he felt pain in his own neck before blacking out in death. It was only the work of a few blood-soaked seconds to dispatch the enemy nin. Breathing in, Minato flicked the blood off of his kunai before slipping it back into his weapon's pouch right as a squad of Anbu appeared. "Hokage-sama," exclaimed a woman in a rodent-like mask. "We weren't informed that you would be out in the field," she offered as she signaled for her squad to go at ease. Rest assured Nezumi Taiko, it was a bit of a, spur-of-the-moment decision, the blonde said as he grinned at the captain. "Let's just say that Hyuga Dono is very good at persuasion," he commented, a light shudder rippling down his back. 2. "Saw?" A tiny voice queried shakily. At once, the fourth rushed over to the small girl, pulling body parts off of her. Under the pile, the young Hyuga was trembling, her clothes soaked in blood and her pale eyes wide. Seeing her, Minato smiled widely, trying to reassure her. "Hey there, Hinata-chan, ready to go home?" he asked, pulling her up into his arms, ignoring the blood soaking into his flame-embroidered robes. Trembling, the young girl huddled into his chest, flinching away from the smell of blood. So young, Minato thought sadly, and already baptized in blood. Little one, I wish we could do better for you and your generation. We should get her formally examined as soon as we get back," Nezumi offered softly, peering over the girl as a frog-masked member checked Hinata over. One of her other squad members, a bear-masked man, inspected part of the remains of the enemy ninja, looking for village markings. "Captain, look, these men were Kumo Nukanen," he called, holding up the slashed symbol of the Lightning Country. "Figures. They've wanted to get their hands on a Hyuga for years now," the woman muttered darkly. "But the gall of them to take the air." It was a common practice among smaller villages for females of clans to be bred until they die, which normally wasn't that long in coming. If Cloud had gotten Hinata, the heir of the Hyuga bloodline, back to Lightning Country, she would have been imprisoned until old enough, and then constantly raped and harvested for eggs in order to create a new branch there. Hinata would never know how lucky she had been that night. The frog-masked man looked over to his captain as the glow from his hands faded. "She's good to go, Captain, just a few bruises," he reported. "Well, what are we waiting for then?" the fourth chirped, rubbing Hinata's back as she squirmed in his arms. Turning, he loped in the direction of his village. "This little one's father is threatening Naruto with life as an only child if we don't get back soon," he explained, sounding much too happy about possible castration to be totally sane. Behind their respective masks, Nezumi's squad all rolled their eyes in amazing synchronization. In the Hokage Tower, a cup cracked, drowning flimsy paper animals in a chilled sea. It was hours later that the young Hokage was finally able to leave the office and return home, body parts intact, to his young son. He hated not being able to take care of him as he would have liked, but with his wife Kushina dead in childbirth, he didn't have much of a choice. "I'm home," he called tiredly as he entered his house, kicking off his sandals at the door. When Iruka didn't answer, Minato was instantly on alert, pulling a kunai out from his pouch as he stalked through his home. Quick looks through the kitchen, dining room and sitting room revealed nothing, but the second he entered the bedroom hallway, the familiar scent of blood tickled his nose. At the end of the hall lay a crumbled figure and a shadow hunched grimly over it. Minato quickly flashed down the hall, almost attacking the crouching figure before recognizing him as a masked Konoha Anbu, possibly the very one he had ordered to check on his son. "Hokage-sama," the Anbu acknowledged grimly. "He's still alive. Looks like he tried to fight too." Looking down on the pallid face of young Iruka, Minato noticed that the boy was, indeed, breathing. There were slash marks on his arms, under his chin, and one across his nose, but whoever had tried to kill him had miraculously missed anything vital. The wounds had already begun to clot, weeping sluggishly in the darkness as the Anbu applied additional pressure. Then the eerie white Anbu wolf mask turned forlornly up to face him. "Hokage-sama, I'm sorry, At once, a chill crept down Minato's spine. "No, please no," he whispered as he opened the door to his son's room with shaking fingers, his breath barely squeezing past the rising horror in his throat. "Sensei." The Anbu called. "Sensei, please wait." Inside the room was the cradle his 4-month-old son should have been sleeping in, but the little one was nowhere to be found. Trembling, the man inched towards the cradle, grabbing one of the small blankets that had been wrapped around his son, clenching it in nerveless fingers. There was blood. There was so much blood. "Naruto," he whimpered, falling to his knees as he lost feeling in his legs. "Naruto, Naruto, Naruto." Out in the northern part of the forest, A young man was grinning as he and his team streaked through the trees towards their ally in Earth Country, their goal sleeping peacefully in his arms. Sleeping peacefully. After they'd drugged the little brat, that is. He may have only been about 4 months old, but he already had a good sense of who could be trusted and who could not. The second he'd awakened and noticed that he was being held by strange men, he'd started screaming with impressive lungs. The man, named Kumode, growled lowly as he rubbed an aching, pulpy shoulder. The kid's screaming had alerted the genin babysitter, and though not very strong, the young man had proven to be a ferocious protector when it came to the little brat. "Oi, Kumode-san, don't fall behind," the leader called, turning to look back at the much younger ninja. Growling, the teen sped up, closing ranks with the other 3 older Junin, wishing that they were already out of the forest. "If I never see another tree again once we get home, it'll be too soon." The young man growled. In his arms, the baby shifted restlessly, and he groaned as he tried to tap down his anger and annoyance. During the hour-long trek, he'd learned that the babe was sensitive to any type of killing intent. Kumode's efforts were wasted though, as young Naruto seemed to be determined to return to the land of the living. Within the span of a few minutes, the blue-eyed child was awake and peering around curiously. "Oh gods, please don't start screaming again," Kumode thought desperately as he stared at the kid. "I don't think my ears could take another round." At first, the little brat seemed calm, and Kumode relaxed a little. "Kumode-san, quit slacking off back there," the leader snapped again, annoyed that the teen was slowing them down. That was all it took. Despite the young Chunin's attempts to keep the baby calm, the anger in the leader's voice was more than enough to set him off again. Scrunching up his little face, Naruto began to howl. At once, the quartet halted, holding their ears as Kumode struggled to calm the brat. "Nice going, Nari-san," he growled, rocking Naruto awkwardly. Nari spat to the side of the path as the medic of the group, a girl named Raiko, reached to pull out another mild dose of tranquilizer. "How was I supposed to know that the little brat was awake?" he snarled, hand-itching to slap the brat back into unconsciousness. "Calm down, senpai," Raiko soothed, wincing at the noise as she approached the baby. "I'll have him under control in a second." It was their final member, Bofu, who noticed first. "Boss, intruder," he snapped, pulling out a short sword. With a snap, the other 3 whirled around, weapons out as they started at the newcomer. He was dressed like a nobleman, wearing an embroidered red kimono that set off the bloody color of his hair. Unseen by the ninja, the intruder's long hair covered delicately pointed ears. One hand was pressed against an ear in pain. On his cheeks were 3 slash marks, as if whiskers had been tattooed into his skin. Gold eyes stared at them as he cocked his head and an arched eyebrow at them. "And what was all that howling for?" he asked lowly, a rumble in his chest. It was only then that Kumode realized the brat had stopped screaming the second that the man had shown up. The squad leader noticed as well, and his mind immediately concocted a theory as to why. "He must be an ally of Konoha," he snapped to the rest of his squad as he held up his kodachi in an offensive position. "Kill him, he'll tell them where we're going," he ordered as he charged the man, bellowing. Taking their cue, the rest of the squad followed, Kumode circling around to hide Naruto in a tree before joining the fray. The strange man watched the Kumo nin with cool eyes, crouching slightly and waiting for them to close in. Then, in a blur of movement, he attacked, slashing with elongated claws and sneering fangs. It only took a second for Nari to die. Blood sprayed from an opened artery as he stumbled back, dead before he hit the ground. The girl Raiko was next. She had managed to perform the signs for a jutsu, aiming at the strange man. Blue lightning arched as it streaked towards her target, destroying trees and foliage in its path. Calmly, the man held up a hand, letting the jutsu crash into it. The energy crackled and flared angrily, but the man didn't even move as it allowed it to run its course. As it dissipated, smoke wisped up from his palm, but there wasn't so much as a scratch on his hand. "Impossible," the woman gasped as he charged her. A kick to the stomach sent her flying into the air. As she fell back down, he slashed in her direction, sending what appeared to be a blade of chakra up after her. With a sickening squelch, it went right through her midsection, making it rain blood momentarily as her body separated into gruesome halves. "Bastard!" Bufu screamed as he swiped at the man. The stranger dodged effortlessly, dancing back as Bufu attacked, blinded by his rage. Seeing a chance, Kumode dropped from the tree he was perched in, trying to drive his kunai into the man's neck. Hearing him, the man twirled around, letting Bufu slice into Kumite's stomach. With a gasp, the younger ninja fell to the ground, unconscious from the pain. Ignoring his fallen partner, the final ninja bellowed as he swiped at the man. The stranger had enough. With a growl, he drove his hand into the ninja's heart, tearing out muscle and veins. With a thud, the dead body fell to the forest floor, signaling the end of the fight. Growling lowly to himself, Kyubi wiped his hands off on the grass, trying to get rid of the foul stench of human blood. Contrary to legends, he would have let them pass without a fight, if they'd only remembered to be polite, but they'd panicked and that was their doom. A low crying reached his ears, reminding him of the reason why he'd been awakened. Sniffing, he picked up the scent of milk and innocent, young human flesh. Curious, he dug his claws into the tree the crying was coming from, and climbed up. Nestled in a crook of the branches was a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Blinking, the kitsune carefully picked up the babe, pulling the blanket away in order to get a better look. Sparkling blue eyes peered up into his golden amber ones. The child was calm again as Kyubi shifted to sit on the branch more comfortably, a hank of red hair falling over his shoulders. As he shifted, the blanket fell from his grasp, fluttering to the blood-soaked ground. Human met fox for the first time. Suddenly, the baby laughed, flailing his little arms and reaching up to pull on Kyubi's crimson hair. Growling in response, the demon immediately held the babe away, trying to get him to let go, but the baby squealed and only tugged harder.
Gah, that's mine, you little monster. Kyubi winced, carefully tugging his hair back. Eventually, due to the lingering drugs in his system or the stress of the day, Naruto tired of pulling the blood-colored strands and yawned as he started to fall asleep again. Grumbling, the legendary Kyubi no Yuko cradled the boy in one arm, massaging his sore scalp. Naruto burbled happily.
Troublesome human, the fox rumbled. With a sigh, the babe shifted closer to his holder, a tiny smile on his face. Sighing as well, the demon peered at a small embroidered patch on the child's pajamas. It was a red swirl with 3 characters stitched onto it. Naruto, he murmured to himself. Well, I guess you and I will be together for a while, he said, grinning slightly as he jumped out of the tree. At least until I can get you back to your home, he said, walking languidly deep into the darkened woods. Hours later, the Anbu from Konoha finally came through the area. At once, the squad, including Anbu Wolf, scattered to look for survivors. It was quite obvious that the Kumo Nin were dead though.
Practically numb, Minato floated through the carnage, distantly taking in the damage. The face of a young kunoichi was frozen in an expression of pain and absolute horror. A few feet away was the lower half of the poor girl, her intestines cleanly sliced from her upper torso. Several steps away, another man lay crumpled face first in the dirt, a gaping hole where his heart should have been.
At the base of a tree, a small scrap of yellow caught Minato's eye, partially jogging him out of the haze that befuddled his mind. Knowing and dreading what he was going to find, he forced himself towards the tree. Picking up the yellow scrap, he traced numb fingers over the familiar swirl of his wife's clan. Naruto. A low, bubbling laugh fully snapped him from his mind-numbing depression. Pocketing the bloody scrap, he turned towards the sound, finding a much younger ninja with a pulpy shoulder wound and a gashing slash across his stomach. Not immediately fatal, but very painful and guaranteed to putrefy from the bacteria and acid from his own gut. Minato, however, recognized the shoulder wound as something Iruka said he'd managed to inflict on Naruto's kidnapper. At once, Minato pulled a kunai from his hip pouch, pulling the young Chunin up by his collar, drawing a pained groan from cracked lips. Tell me what happened to my son and I will kill you swiftly, he promised. The boy, barely a man, grinned through the pain, dull brown eyes looking up into Minato's blue. What more can you do to me? I'm dying already, he said, blood starting to coat his teeth. Immediately, Minato twirled his kunai and thrust the tri-pronged tip up and into the younger man's ribs, biting fragile lungs with the sharp kiss of dark metal. As soon as the other man quieted, the fourth grinned darkly. I can drag this out for as long as I need to. He nodded at the frog Anbu who had joined him the instant the Kumo Nin had screamed, the rest of the squad standing not far behind. Gama-san here can and will bring you back from the edge again, and again, and again, even as you beg for mercy, he declared with frightening cheer. So why don't you just make it easier on all of us, and tell me where my son is? Coughing, the younger man spat a mouthful of blood in Minato's face. Hell if I know, he groaned, then screamed as Minato switched the kunai from one side to the other. Seriously, I don't know. He was up there, he yelled, nodding towards the tree they were under. At once, the wolf Anbu jumped up into the tree, only to signal back that nothing was in the foliage. The Kumo Nin continued, We ran into this demon, he attacked us, when I woke up, both were gone. There are no demons in our forest, Nezumi Taiko snapped. We would know if there were demons near our home. There is no doubt, in my mind, that it was a demon that attacked us, the man gasped, having trouble breathing as his lungs started to flood with blood. As far as I know, the brat's been eaten, he sneered before slumping back. He laughed again, spitting up more blood. Eyes hard, Minato tossed the man away, letting the Anbu with the bear mask catch him. Wolf Mask silently reached towards his Hokage, but stalled. Nezumi shook her head as she straightened and turned to the frog-masked medic. Heal him as best you can, she ordered, motioning to the hysterical Kumo Nin. He needs to survive interrogation. Hokage-sama. The darkness of sorrow was starting to seep in again as Minato took in the carnage around him. Swallowing bile, he leaned against the tree, anguished eyes falling on a single strand of long hair, glinting in the branches like crimson-spun spider silk. Kyuubi sighed as he came up on his home, a small, traditional Japanese house hidden by kitsune illusions. Tiredly, he cradled the sleeping babe closer to his side as he slid the door open. "I'm home," he called softly, his voice rumbling in his chest. At once, he was surrounded by wispy lights, each with slightly different coloring from one another, and each bobbing around him like children begging for attention. If one were to look close enough, they would see cute, pixie-like faces within the delicate flames. "Enough," Kyuubi finally commanded, waving the Hitodama away. "Get something for this one to sleep on for the night," he ordered. "I hope you have something for me as well, Kyuubi dono." The proud fox looked up sharply at the sultry voice, only to see that he had a visitor. Said visitor was lazily sprawled on his futon, almond-shaped yellow eyes looking up at him in daring. Her dark black hair was done up in an elaborate knot, pieces loose to frame an attractive, heart-shaped face, pointed ears poking out from under her hair. Her kimono was dyed with blues and purples, depicting a cloudy sky. The front was open enough to begin to flaunt her chest, and the way she was sitting showed off her pale legs. She smiled at the now alert fox. "Surprised to see me?" she asked. "Not really, Ni-san. You always show up when I don't want you to," Kyuubi grumbled, shifting the child in his arms. "Move, will you? This one's getting heavy," he ordered. Smiling, the cat shifted away, letting the kitsune put the baby down. Sighing, Naruto rolled over onto his back, sucking on a little fist as Kyuubi moved into another room. Mentally, he summoned a Hitodama for a new robe as he stripped off the bloody one. The Nekomata chuckled. "How many times do I have to tell you not to call me that? We are not related, and I'm not a man," she laughed, with the ease of an old joke. She turned to look at Naruto, a clawed hand reaching out to caress a plump cheek. "Cute kid. Dare I ask where you got him?" She sniffed it delicately, leaning in closer to get full use out of her limited nose. "Doesn't smell like a Hanyu," she remarked, looking over at him through the shoji with cool, slitted eyes. "And the gods know there are enough of them out there with your blood in their veins," she said as the fox returned into the room, clad in a yellow yukata. "He's human enough, Neko-san," Kyuubi snapped as the other Hitodama returned with a second and third futon. Gratefully, the fox took one of the thick pads, but the Nibi waved hers off. "Take it," Kyuubi ordered, spreading his out next to Naruto's. "I know nothing of parenting, and you know it," he groaned. He hesitated before forcing out his request. "I would appreciate it if you stayed to help me for a few days." "Why?" the cat asked bluntly, sitting up. "You've never taken an interest in any of your bastards, so why a human child?" she asked. She sniffed the child thoroughly before snorting. "A child who smells of blood, steel, and other humans no less," she snapped. "You and I both know he belongs to a hidden village with this scent," she warned. "A hidden village that probably believes he's dead at this point," Kyuubi argued, flopping back on his mattress, clawed hands folded behind his head. "And my bastards are strong enough to take care of themselves. This one, Naruto, is not near strong enough yet," he said, staring up at the ceiling. "And for your information, you're smelling the ninja I killed on him. He's a toddler, not a potential killer." "Can't be a toddler, he's not even a year old yet," the cat argued, letting the kid wrap little fingers around a clawed digit. Large blue eyes blinked up at her for a minute before the babe fell back asleep. She sighed after a moment, shaking her head. "All right, I'll help you. But I don't know much about kits myself," she warned. "Then I guess we'll learn how together," the fox retorted. "Now take your futon and go into the other room," he ordered. "Ah, don't you trust me, Kyuubi dono?" she purred as she accepted the futon from the Hitodama that were hovering around her, standing gracefully. "No more than you trust me," he snorted. He rolled over to face the doors. "And I don't feel like being pounced on tonight, so stay in your own room." Annoyed at being called out, the woman sniffed in annoyance as she retired to the next room, sliding the doors closed with a sharp snap. Later that night, a sly-faced cat glided from her room, wearing nothing but the bindings around her chest and hips. "Your ass is mine tonight, Kyuubi dono, whether you know it or not," she thought, slinking over to the futon. The second mattress was empty, but there was a strange lump in the first one, the one that the baby was supposed to be sleeping on. With her superior eyes, Nibby was able to make out a wolf-sized fox wrapped around the babe. Nine tails twitching slightly as the little human shifted in his sleep, cuddling closer to the warm fur. Blinking, the demonic cat couldn't help but smile at the sleepers. Shrugging, she hunched over, hands balling into fists as she mentally triggered the change, letting her Yuki wrap around her like a cloak. Within minutes, she had transformed into a large black cat, both tails waving silkily in the air as she wrapped around the two boys, eyes slowly closing as she succumbed to sleep. Daybreak came sooner than the two yokai would have liked. Warm yellow sunlight filtered through the shoji door, striking the three sleepers. Grumbling, Kyubi shifted in his sleep, turning his furry head away from the light for a moment before his eyes blinked open. What a night, he thought, sitting up in order to scratch behind an ear. Putting his foot down, the pad brushed against something, and he looked down out of reflex. Oh yeah, he thought as he watched little Naruto sleeping on the futon. That's right, I got a charge to take care of, he muttered in a scratchy voice. Smiling slightly, he crouched down next to the baby, caressing a soft cheek with his muzzle. The scent of blood and steel had already worn off, so now there was only a milky smell in his nostrils. Looking up, he whistled lowly, summoning the Hitodama. Mentally, he ordered them to get started on breakfast. As the other 9 whisked away, he focused on a small sand-colored flame. Sadly, he held out a paw for the poor creature to rest on. So, no sign of your master yet, he asked. The spirit seemed to droop even further on Kyubi's paw as the fox tried to think of where else the little creature could search. Why don't you rest here for a while and then try the desert and wind country? He offered. Nodding, the pixie-like creature blinked away, going to rest in the inner confines of the house. Watching it go, Kyubi sighed. The youngest of the demons had been missing for months now, and as the oldest and strongest, the little spirit had come to him for help. Damn it, Shukaku, where are you? He muttered angrily. Naya. Can't a lady get some sleep? Meowed a second voice behind the fox. Freezing, the older demon slowly turned, shifting back down into his humanoid form as he did so. There, curled up by his flank, was the large, silky black form of a cat. I thought I told you to stay in your own room, he barked. Yawning, the cat sat up, tongue curling behind sharp fangs. I am in my room, she muttered as she pawed at her eyes. Opening them, she looked up at the fox, only to blush underneath the dark fur. Oops, she murmured. Oops is right. Kyubi snapped, fiery hair standing on end as he growled at the demoness. At their feet, Naruto began to stir. I ordered you to stay in your room, but you didn't listen to me. Did it ever occur to you that there was a reason for it? Nekomata snarled as she shifted back into her humanoid form as well, ignoring her lack of clothes as she stood up to the kitsune. Naruto, unnoticed by the two demons, was blinking as he looked up at them. Oh, don't give me a silly reason like, I didn't want to lash out at you, she mocked. If you were that worried, then you wouldn't have been sleeping next to the kit. Kyubi sneered. Naruto had scrunched up his little face, like he was concentrating on something. He's different, he doesn't wish to paw me like a piece of meat, or a common whore. He smirked as he looked the cat over. I see you're still naturally dark. At this age, the others and I were sure you were starting to dye your hair, he said maliciously. With a snarl, the cat reached for Kyubi, ready to tear out his throat, only to stop short as a horrible smell wafted up into their sharp noses. Eyes wide, the two looked at each other before turning to look down at the source of the scent. Naruto smiled happily as he looked up at them, a proud air around him. Smiling wildly, the cat clapped her hands, summoning a pair of red and black tinted Hitodama to her side. Well, best I go get some clothes on, she babbled. And food? I best make some food, he's bound to be hungry. Wait a minute. Kyubi barked frantically, grabbing Nibby's arm. You said you were gonna help me, he exclaimed wildly, forgetting that he'd already set his own Hitodama to start breakfast. And I am. Do you want him to start screaming for food? She asked as she pulled away. Trust me, changing him is common sense, you'll need me for other things though. As the cat disappeared through the shoji, Kyubi looked down at the babe with wide eyes before picking him up, holding him away from him. Looking to the side, his eye twitched as the Hitodama set down a small table, large white napkins set on a corner. Slowly, gingerly, he placed the baby on the table, and started opening the little yukata. In the kitchen with her Hitodama, Nekomata flinched as a howl of surprise echoed throughout the house. A few minutes later, as she was bringing out the food, she forced herself not to smile at the wide-eyed look of horror on Kyubi's face. It couldn't have been that bad, she chirped, putting down a bowl of rice porridge. You have no idea, the fox muttered, holding the baby Naruto away from him as he sat down at the low table. He peed on me, he whispered in horror, wiping his face convulsively. Hearing this, the cat couldn't help but laugh at the disgusted look on the older demon's face. You'll learn to dodge, she promised as she quieted before holding out her arms for the child. Now, feeding is easy. Minato sighed as he twirled a mission scroll between his fingers. Distantly, he noticed that he'd beaten his previous time record for this activity, but he didn't care. Ever since the incident with Kumogakure, he had been living for the village alone. Another war had been barely averted, but only through the death of the head of the Hyuga branch family, Hizashi. I hope Neji-kun will forgive me for that eventually, the man thought. He sighed again as he looked down at his desk. It was much cleaner than it had ever been 4 years ago, but that was because he didn't care about goofing off anymore. Shaking his head, trying to clear away that thought, he turned back to the scrolls, scanning the trade proposition in front of him. The Land of Claw was interested in their weaponry, and was offering fur and fish in exchange. As Minato started to write a response, a knock at the door alerted him to a visitor. Looking up blankly, he set his brush aside as he sat up. "Come in," he called, plastering a fake happy look on his face. Hearing him, the door opened as the Anbu wolf entered in. Seeing him, the grin on Minato's face eased a little, becoming a little more natural. "Okami-san, it's good to see you," he said truthfully as he sat up behind the desk. The man shook his head as he bowed. "Okami-san for not much longer, sensei. I'm handing in my sword and armor," he said as he pulled off the mask, revealing a dark eye and silver hair. He smiled at the shocked look on Minato's face. "I've had enough. I'm getting out before I become a monster," he offered, passing the man his mask. Slowly, Minato took the mask, the white porcelain face snarling up at him. "Are you sure about this, Kakashi-san?" he asked. When the young man nodded, the Hokage sighed as he passed the mask back to the man with the kunai. "It's up to you to destroy the mask, Kakashi-san," he said slowly. "Hand in your sword and armor to the Anbu section of the tower, and shatter the mask there," he ordered. Bowing, Kakashi turned to leave the office, only to turn back to look at his old teacher. "Sensei, are you doing all right?" he asked, one eye giving him a concerned look. Looking up at him, Minato slowly grinned widely before nodding. Kakashi, though, was not convinced. He trained under the man for long enough to know when he was truly happy, and when it was a mask. "I'm fine, Kakashi-san, really," Minato assured, going through the scrolls on his desk. "I'm just so busy lately, I don't know what I'm doing," he muttered. "Sensei," Kakashi started, then shook his head as the older man looked up at him again. "I'd like to appoint Anbu Weasel as the captain of my squad," he finally said. "Are you sure?" Yandaime asked. "Weasel-san has only been Anbu for a year. Besides, he's only going to hit 13 in a few weeks." "He's ready. Uchiha Itachi will make a fine Anbu captain," Kakashi offered. Nodding, Minato turned back to his scrolls, making a quick note to send down to Anbu. Kakashi turned to leave again, but paused before opening the door. "Sensei, if you ever just want to talk or something, you know where to find me, all right?" he offered before slipping out of the office. Minato smiled slightly at the younger man before summoning a secretary to give the note to the Anbu branch. It was a decision that he would regret. The young man seemed to be all right as he started his new duties as captain, the only outward sign being the deep lines that began to carve themselves into his face under his eyes. Then there was the death of Uchiha Shisui, a promising young ninja, and Itachi's best friend. The interrogation squad released Itachi, concluding that he had nothing to do with it, but no more than a few days later, tragedy struck. He didn't learn about what had happened until well after the event. A pounding on his office door awoke him late that night, and he sat up sharply, a scroll sticking to his cheek. Disgusted, he pulled it off, ignorant of the ink stains on his face, right as a trio of Anbu members poofed into the room. "What's happened?" he barked, vaulting over his desk. The captain, the woman code-named Nezumi, sighed as she looked behind her. Standing between Kuma and Gamma was a wide-eyed boy with a splatter of blood across his pale face. The only reason he was still standing on shaking legs was the fact that the toad was holding him up. It was the distinctive fan mark on the boy's back that identified the child. "We found him wandering through the streets near the Uchiha district. What we found there when we investigated was a slaughter," the woman stated. Behind her, the young Sasuke shuddered and leaned away from Gamma, swaying on his feet. Ignorant, or just ignoring the boy, the captain went on. "The entire clan of the Uchiha was destroyed. The only survivor was the boy himself. We're pretty sure he's seen the culprit." That was enough for the 5-year-old. Stumbling, he jerked away and raced for the door, trying to get away from the adults. At once, the bear grabbed him, holding him still as the boy flailed in his arms, trying to land a hit on the Anbu. Gently, the Anbu pulled the young Uchiha's arms back into a defensive hold, restricting his movements as carefully as he could. Quietly, the Hokage kneeled in front of the young man, placing a hand on his shoulder as he stopped kicking. "Get away," Sasuke muttered. Get away, he'll come back, he'll kill you. Who will kill me, Sasuke-kun? Minato asked calmly. I can't help you if you don't tell me, he said when the Uchiha went quiet. Sasuke shuddered as Kuma slowly released his hold on his arms, letting him fall into the gentle grasp of Namikaze. Why? Why'd you do it? Why me, San? Slowly, Minato scooped the boy into his arms as he stood up. I'm so sorry, little one. And I'm sorry I put the burden of Enbu captain on you, Itachi. Out in the forest, a certain Sannin was on his way back to the village for the first time in months, unaware of the crisis going on in Konoha. Sharp eyes flicked from angle to angle, taking in every shadow in the trees. Suddenly, a rustling in the foliage ahead of him set the man on alert, and he crouched as he pulled out a kunai. Before the man could do anything though, a bevy of small, flame-like creatures swarmed. Yelping, the man swatted at them, trying to get rid of them, only to miss the sneak attack from behind. The last thing he saw before blacking out from the blow to his head, was a small green figure descending from the trees. The boy, no more than 5 or 6 years old, grinned as he pulled a can of hair dye from his pack, passing it to the blue-tinted Hitodama. This'll be good, he muttered as he pulled out a razor and a can of hairspray. A green-tinted sprite tugged on his sleeve nervously, trying to get the child to move. Grinning, the child plucked the little Hitodama off his Haori sleeve, pushing it away. It's okay, Itsumo. Just watch out for Hito-san, okay? He asked, grabbing a handful of the ninja's hair. Later that night, the same boy was sneaking his way through the halls of his home, hoping to get back to his room without getting caught, the Hitodama trailing after him like ducklings. Na-ru. 2. Naruto froze as his father growled at him, the demon thudding down the hall towards him. The first Hitodama, the red one, was floating next to his shoulder, as if saying, I told you so, I told you he was being bad. As one, the other sprites scattered, leaving the 4-year-old alone. Kyuubi frowned at the boy, pushing the red sprite away from his face. After a moment, he sighed, shaking his head. I thought I told you to tell me when you're going to prank someone, he said resignedly. How do you know? Naruto paused as he looked down at his clothes. His previously forest green haori and blue hakama were splattered with pink dye, ruining the outfit. The demon shook his head, hiding a grin as he looked at his son. You know why I want you to tell me, right? He asked, leaning over to look the boy in the eyes. To stop me from having fun, Naruto muttered sullenly. To keep you from getting hurt, the demon corrected. There are dangerous creatures out there, and you're not strong or fast enough to get away. What if a ninja caught you? He asked. Mentally, he ordered the Hitodama to start a bath to get the dye off Naruto. I know, San, Naruto muttered. The small bag on his little shoulders fell to the ground, and Kyuubi's ears twitched at the sound of metal clanging against the floor. Curiously, the demon picked up the bag and rummaged through it, only to hiss as he pricked his palm against something sharp. What's this? He muttered, only to pull out a kunai. It was old, covered in scratches and worn down from being sharpened multiple times over the years. Where'd you get this? He asked slowly. Naruto shrugged, looking away from his father. The man I pranked had it in his hand, he muttered. Kyuubi's eyes went wide as he looked at the kunai again. The owner of said weapon must have been a ninja for years, if the wear on the dagger was any indication. My son has just pranked a ninja, he thought slowly before stifling a grin. I'm so proud, he thought happily. Normally a father would be angry that his son had pranked someone quite capable of hurting him, but Kyuubi was a kitsune, and pranks were a part of his nature. So, Kyuubi chirped, a devilish grin stretching over his features. Judging by your haori, the prank was hair-based. May I ask what you did to the man? It was few days later that the Sannin managed to get back to Konoha, a henge around his head to make him look normal again. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to fool the Hokage. Orochimaru-san, Minato asked in amusement, why do you have a henge around your hair? Instantly, the snake-like man glared at the blonde before him. There's a Mononoke in the forest, he snarled. Minato perked up. Really? What'd it do to you? He asked, grinning. Thin lips pressed tight, Orochimaru shook his head. I am not taking it off, he growled. You sound like an Inuzuka when you do that, Minato joked. Seriously though, I need to see, in case you need to see the medic nin, he ordered. Orochimaru closed his eyes in extreme annoyance and drew a hissing breath. Oh, for goodness sake, Oroji-san, it can't be that bad.
Quote. Kai, the snake Sannin grudgingly intoned. Quote.
The fourth burst into hysterics as the older man finally released the illusion. Someone had shaved most of the Sannin's head, and dyed the rest of it hot pink. It was pulled into a mohawk to finish it off. Hokage-sama. Orochimaru growled, his pale hand twitching over his kunai holster. Still laughing, The fourth inched away from the man who had respectfully threatened his life. "I'm sorry, sorry," Minato gasped. "Why haven't you washed it out?" he asked, wheezing. "I've tried. It refused to come out," the man muttered, replacing the henge. "Well, go on home and try again," Minato ordered gently. "Buy a solvent or something." Standing, he walked with the Habi Sanin towards the door, then quickly turned to his secretary as soon as the Sanin was gone. "Send for the Anbu infiltration members. Tell them they need to get pictures of the snake Sanin now. Use the chakra filters on the film, it'll be worth it," he ordered gleefully, mentally cackling. "That what you get for staying away from the village for 5 months, he thought evilly. "Why? What's wrong?" she asked as she passed the note to a Chunin. "I'll send you a copy," Minato promised, calming slightly. "For now though, I'm going to go check up on Sasuke-kun," he said as he marched out. The young woman sighed, but grinned softly anyway. And officially taking in the boy had already done much in improving the work ethic and social life of the Hokage, even if he had become a mother hen over the young Uchiha. Seems that even in all that evil, there was still a little good, she thought as she turned back to her filing. In the hospital a few minutes later, Minato grinned as he entered Sasuke's room, carrying a takeout bag from the Ichiraku stand. "How you feeling today, Sasuke-kun?" he asked as he set out the food. Dully, the boy looked up at the young Hokage, slowly taking the bowl from the older blonde. Fragrant steam curled up around his face, shrimp, while the Hokage pulled out a miso ramen, pulling the wooden chopsticks out of the bag. Minato grinned again as he passed a second pair of chopsticks to the boy, pulling his own apart with a snap. Part of the left one came off onto the right, but Minato paid it no mind as he plucked a noodle from the rich broth. "I had a great morning. You wouldn't believe what I saw today," he chattered, trying to get the boy to open up a little. When dark eyes flickered up at him, the blonde released a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding before launching into his tale of what had happened to Orochimaru. It had taken 5 minutes and a quick series of henge for the Yondaime to get Sasuke to smile, and one more to get him to giggle helplessly. As soon as he was done though, he sobered, looking down at the bed sheets. Gently, Minato placed a hand on the boy's shoulder as he released the final henge. "It's okay to laugh every now and again, you know," he said gently. "Why did he do it though?" Sasuke whispered, unconsciously leaning into the gentle pressure of the Hokage's hand. Minato shook his head. "I don't know why," he said honestly. He paused before plowing on. "Sasuke-kun, if there's anything I can do for you, I want you to come to me, alright?" he said, practically ordering the last Uchiha. Before the boy could say anything, their lunch was interrupted by the arrival of an Anbu from infiltration. This one was wearing a hawk mask, and didn't look much older than Kakashi. "Hokage-sama," he started. "Oh good. Did you get the pictures I asked for?" "Well, yes, but..." The Anbu paused. "The investigation you ordered months ago, Hokage-sama, on the activities of the Habi Sanin. I believe you see the results," the Taka replied as he handed 2 packets to the blonde Hokage. Serious now, Minato pulled out the photos from the first packet, pausing long enough to pass them to Sasuke, a picture of Orochimaru's new haircut. It was a grim Hokage that led the squads of Anbu into the abandoned warehouse outside of Konoha. Multiple squads were behind their village leader, all as grim and angry as the blonde. Up next to Minato were the squad leaders, Nezumi, Kurahayu, who'd been promoted over the years, and the youngest current member, a Hyuga woman code named Kojaku for the Sparrow Mask. Coming up to the door, Minato scowled before snapping his leg out, hitting the door. There was a crack, but Orochimaru had obviously reinforced the door. Leaning back, Minato kicked again. This time, the portal exploded in with a shower of splinters. "Move!" Nezumi barked, leading the squads into the building. Eyes hard, Minato stalked after the Anbu, coat snapping behind him as he followed Taka and Inu through the area. As they descended into the bottom level, a sickly green glow lit the room, marking the area that Taka had found before. As in the photos, the bodies of small children were floating in the unknown liquid. They ranged from the toddlers to 3 years old, all dead. Minato was unsurprised to recognize one little girl as a missing Inuzuka child. "Hokage-sama," Inu gasped, holding a hand up to stop the man from entering the room ahead of them. "Stand down, Inu-san," Minato growled lowly, pushing past the man to storm into the room. Cells lined the walls, and a closer look revealed 30-plus bodies, the rest of the missing children. These were older than the others, from ages 4 to 7, and their deaths had been more gruesome than the younger ones. Many of the small bodies were twisted in agony, and some of them had roots and branches growing out of them. Minato's sharp eyes picked out the slight movement in the corner, and silently, he signaled for Taka to check it out. Nodding, the young man used the shunshin to enter the cage, and gently kneeled over source of the movement. "This one's still alive," he called out, checking the child's pulse. Get him to the hospital now, Minato ordered. Send Anbu Usagi to look for Tsunade Heim. She'll be in the gambling towns outside of Konoha. Tell her she's being ordered back. Nodding, the hawk gathered the boy in his arms before sunshining out of the cell again. Saluting awkwardly, the man raced out of the warehouse. Vibrating in rage now, Minato stormed down the hall, kicking another door in as he grabbed a kunai from his pouch. Orochimaru. He barked, dropping the honorific. He no longer held any respect for the man. They were obviously in a lab of some kind. Tables were scattered around with beakers filled with unknown liquids on them. Notes were lying on one table, and one sheet was being held by the snake man himself. Smirking, Orochimaru folded the sheet up and slipped it into his vest before turning to the angered man before him. Hokage-sama, how nice of you to join me, he simpered. Cut the crap, Orochimaru. What the hell are you doing here with these kids? Minato snapped, blue eyes narrowed as a few more Anbu slid up behind him, joining Inu. Orochimaru spread his hands placatingly, an innocent look on his face. You should be thanking me. I'm trying to recreate one of the bloodlines that helped to create Konoha. Too bad none of them survived though, he said. Maybe I should try it with Anko-chan, she's so much stronger than these weaklings were, he suggested. You won't lay a hand on Anko-chan again, traitor. Minato snapped. You are under arrest, for crimes against the village, he barked, the Anbu behind him moving to grab the snake summoner. With a hissing laugh, the pale man ducked away from the masked Anbu, long tongue lolling as he jumped over Inu, kunai in hand. Evil cackles escaped from his throat as he slashed one of the smaller Anbu members across the throat, effectively killing her with a spray of hot blood over his Junin vest as she collapsed to the floor, thrashing. Twirling, the sharp blade went into the soft tissue of the stomach of another, ripping out flesh. With a cry of pain, Inu backed away, hands clasped over his stomach as he struggled to hold in his own intestines. Inu's teeth were gritted tightly behind the mask as blood seeped past his fingers. Orochimaru's tongue wrapped around the throat of Kojaku as he kicked one of her squad members away, only to release her as Minato attacked, trying to hamstring the snake of a man. Smirking, Orochimaru jumped away from the blonde, only to race for the door. To Minato's surprise, the man's body stretched and warped, like a snake's, allowing him to get around the Hokage before he could react. After him, Minato yelled, alerting the remaining Anbu in the warehouse before going after the man himself. Don't let him get outside. If the snake got out, he'd be able to use the shunshin to get farther away, something that he couldn't use inside the building. He needed open space to get going. Coughing, Kojaku eased herself to her feet in order to inspect Inu. Hokage-sama, we need to get Inu-san to the hospital now, she called in a raspy voice. Take him, Minato ordered before racing after Orochimaru himself. Too late though, as Kurahayu shook his head at the young Hokage. I'm sorry sir, he got away before we could do anything. Angrily, the man gritted his teeth together before issuing the order that would change the history of the elemental countries forever. Inform the Hunter Nin. Orochimaru of the Sannin is now to be classified as an S-class Nukenin. Orders are to kill on sight. Orochimaru was smirking in triumph as he darted through the trees. Sure, his experiments in Konoha may have been destroyed, but he'd long since created other labs in other countries, including the land of rice. For now though, he planned on meeting up with Pain and the other members of the Akatsuki. After all, they'd been gracious enough to grant him a place in their ranks. The snake Sannin sneered. As long as they were useful to his purposes, he had no problems with reaping the benefits of their membership. They were fools, but they were powerful fools. He'd play with them until they outlived their usefulness.
All of a sudden, the forest around him went silent so abruptly it was as if someone had rendered him suddenly deaf. Orochimaru slid to a halt, instinctively pulling out a kunai and surveying his surroundings for a hint of whatever was making the animals shut up from their various calls and general noise-making. A sibilant mist crept out of the surrounding trees, wrapping around the path, washing a deathly chill over the man's skin. Slowly, making no sudden moves, he shifted into a defensive position.
Hunger. A soft voice growled from the trees, coming from all angles. Eyes wide, Orochimaru inched back as a spectral animal slunk out of the forest ahead of him. It was a fox the size of an elephant, red fur matted over lean sides as it eyed the snake Sannin. Of course, the man had no idea as to how to handle this creature, or even what it was. Konoha knew of the existence of demons, but not much after that. This one smells hunger from you. It hissed, eyes glowing a demonic red. It makes me hungry. For the blood of a snake, it roared, diving at the man. Taken by surprise, Orochimaru jumped away, trying to duck away from flashing teeth and razor-like claws, only to fall back against a tree. He threw an explosive tag and kunai in desperation and leapt for shelter. Silence. There was no explosion. No sound. Slowly, the man moved from his defensive crouch. He breathed out, hearing nothing but the pounding of blood in his ears. The forest was still unnaturally quiet, but the creature was gone. Genjutsu? Who would dare? Gritting his teeth, the snake summoner darted forward, intent on distancing himself from whatever it was that interfered with his escape. The air was laden with a level of killing intent that would have sent a lesser shinobi to his knees, and the sense of danger was growing by the minute. Going somewhere? The voice laughed mockingly behind him, urging the man to swipe behind him with the kunai, only to cut through empty air. Too late. You are already within my stomach. It growled, as the trees and forest shifted into oozing red walls, acidic slime dripping down. The walls pulsed, as if with a heartbeat, and Orochimaru's eyes went wide as they started to contract around him. Coughing, the man spat up the Kusanagi no Suguri, and frantically slashed at the walls before him. Blood and acid hissed and splashed from the wound, but it took a second slash for the muscle to part enough for the snake to slip through. Wasting no time, the man dashed through the forest, not bothering to take the time to look back. Up in the trees, Kyuubi chuckled, his son holding his hands over his mouth to keep from laughing. Did you see the slime? Naruto gasped as soon as the man was far enough away. His hair. He spat out before falling back against the amused fox, clutching at his dark blue robe for support. It wasn't that funny, Kyuubi argued, smiling at the 5-year-old. Giggling, the boy nodded against his side, before slowly recovering. Ah, to be young and find everything funny again, Kyuubi thought, remembering some of the pranks he'd pulled as a kid. Grinning, Naruto bounced slightly in his tree as he listened to his father. Now Naruto-kun, it's always best to remember which roads are used the most. If you want a large-scale prank, go for them, and set a trap. However, if you want a smaller, more personal touch to the prank, the more secluded roads are better, Kyuubi explained, gently pushing a hitodama away from his face. The fox had decided that if Naruto was going to pull pranks, he'd prefer that the kid knew everything he did.
Also, if you have the chance, fit the prank to the subject. For instance, he stated, lifting a finger and taking the air of a teacher. If your subject smells like a certain animal, then that usually means they're a summoner. That man just now reeked of snake, and what does a fox do to snakes? We eat them. Naruto cheered quietly, throwing his hands into the air.
The fox bared his fangs and nodded as his clawed fingers flew through a quick series of seals, dispelling the jutsu. Exactly. What was that thingy you did with your hands? Naruto asked, clumsily imitating the hand seals he'd seen the fox perform. Surprised, the fox glanced down at the boy as he jumped down from the tree, sun under his arm. Letting him down, the demon grinned, baring pointed teeth. You want me to teach you? He asked as they started for the house. Yeah. Then I can use that for pranks like you, Naruto chirped happily. Kyuubi chuckled again. Is that the only reason why you want to know what I was doing? He asked, then stiffened. To-san? Naruto asked, confused by the sudden change in the fox's demeanor. Kyuubi grabbed the boy by the back of his shirt and turned him around in an efficiently graceful motion. When he spoke, his voice was curt. Naruto, go home with the Hitotachi. What? Naruto protested as he was dumped on the ground, but To-san, you said. Now, Naruto. Bad little boys who don't listen to their parents get eaten by monsters in the forest. A new voice spoke. And you'll find some snakes aren't as easy to fool as your father would have you believe, little human. To-san would never let Naruto leave, Kyuubi ordered. With a dismissive wave of his hand, the hitodama converged on Naruto, who thankfully sensed his father's grim mood and allowed himself to be carted off in sullen silence. It's been a long time, Yoko-san. At the sound of the voice, Kyuubi looked up to see another man, this one dressed as elegantly as him. But he knew very well that this was no man. The other demon chuckled lowly as he watched the blonde boy disappear behind a veil of illusions. He flicked his long, braided hair over his shoulder. He was wearing dark colors, a dark gray kimono with a black serpent twining up his chest. Red, almond-shaped eyes were the only points of color on the man. So, the rumors were true, he rumbled. You've taken in a human child.
A passing whim, Yamada-san, Kyuubi answered curtly. Even as he said this though, the fox wasn't even sure if that was still the reason. He leaned against a tree as he causally draped his arms over his chest, claws playing with the rich blue fabric of his own sleeves. So, what brings the Hachibi into my territory? He asked, red eyes narrowing slightly.
The eight-tailed snake casually tilted his head back, baring part of his throat. At once, Kyuubi relaxed a little as the snake smirked at him. I have some information you might be interested in, he offered. I'm listening. The humans in the land known as Rice are growing restless. The ones we were warned about before are starting to gather.
Do they have the numbers yet? No, they number only 6 at the moment. They need at least 3 more. However, they have converged together, and are on their way here.
That's still 6 too many. The snake snorted. What can they do? Even if they did get the numbers they need, there's still no way they could ever hope to overpower us? Enough. Kyubi barked. We will worry about them if they increase their numbers again. For now, warn the others as you see them, the fox ordered. The Hachibi gave a simpering smile as he inclined his head, giving as small of a bow as he could without angering the stronger fox. Speaking of the others, have you perchance heard from Ichibi no Shukaku lately? Kyubi sighed as he shook his head, dark red hair flying behind in a wave of silk. No, but I hope that the drunkard can be found soon. Far away, in a land of wind and sand, a young boy sighed as he wandered the sand-strewn streets. His father was too busy to even notice that he had a second son, not that he had even cared before. The boy sighed again, clutching the small, stuffed panda to his chest as he tried to find something to do. His siblings were too busy to play with him, being in the academy. He did miss his uncle though, as the effeminate man had played and cared for him before dying on a mission. Green eyes looked up at a sudden flash of light. A small flame was dancing in front of him, and he smiled shyly. As if knowing he was being watched, the flame, a light yellow the color of the dunes, bobbed in greeting before retreating slightly. It paused and waited, as if it wanted the boy to follow. Happily, the boy trotted after the light, following it into the warehouse district. Where are we going? He finally chirped, not really caring if the flame answered him or not. To his surprise, he was quickly answered when the little flame stopped in front of a warehouse, one of the older ones. Curious, the boy pushed the door open, and stepped into the room, the spirit flame right behind him. In the gloom of the dark, young Gara gazed at a kettle that the flame was circling on the shelf, a kettle covered in seals. Gently, the little redhead pulled the kettle down, setting the panda to the side as he peered at the seals. Some were intact, while others seemed to be unraveling, like ants crawling and marching off the ofudas. What should Gara do with this? He asked softly, holding the heavy kettle up to the small flame. In answer, the flame flew at his face, startling Gara into dropping the kettle. With a crack, the seals gave out and the clay pot shattered against the floor. There was an insane cackle within the cloud of smoke that arose from the shattered vessel. In awe, Gara backed away, the stuffed bear clutched tightly to his chest. Slowly, the smoke condensed, forming a young man with short blonde hair, most of it pulled into a tail behind pointed ears. For some reason, he was dressed as a traveling monk, only he was missing the staff that most monks were like to carry. Yellow eyes seemed to glow in the darkness as the man grinned, stretching and cracking his neck. After all these years, I'm finally free from that stupid thing, he exclaimed, shuffling through the shelves, looking for something. After a minute, he grinned again as he pulled out an old conical straw hat, only to turn and finally notice Gara.
Oh shit, did he see me? He thought, smiling warily. Seeing this, Gara smiled back at once, his face lighting up at the thought of someone who will be able to play with him again. Yep, he saw me, Shu thought, holding his hands up in front of him.
Hey kid, thanks for. This is gonna be our secret, okay? So, I'll just be going now, he muttered, pulling the hat on. Slowly, he edged for the door, a twitch going down his spine as the boy followed him with wide hopeful eyes. Once outside, Shukaku started for the border of the village, trying to ignore the boy behind him. Luckily, the border he was heading for was relatively unguarded, and he was out of the village before even noticing that Gara was still following him. Eyes wide, he turned to look at the giggling boy. Why are you following me? He asked loudly, trying to get the boy to stop. Gara only smiled though, and Shukaku grumbled. I don't have time for tag-alongs, kid. You better go home. The small face instantly crumbled, and the boy shook his head no. Look, I'm grateful and everything, 'cause it was pretty sucky in that stupid kettle, but I don't like kids, okay? It's better for everyone if you just forget you saw me, get it?
Quote. Gara doesn't want to go home. Why the hell does Gara not? Shukaku demanded.
Gara kicked at the sand. He tucked his bear under his chin and whispered. Gara doesn't want to go home because there's no one at home but the ghosts. Shukaku did a double take and stared contemplatively into liquid green eyes. What, you can see them? Really see them? The boy nodded silently. Some of them are nice, but all of them are very sad. They make scary noises when Gara goes to sleep, and then everyone looks at Gara funny, like. The boy broke off, staring pleadingly up at Shukaku. Please don't make Gara go home. Konkuro ni and Tamari ne aren't home yet. There's no one home but the ghosts. You're not shitting me, are you? The demon warned. There aren't many people who have the spiritual power needed to really see ghosts. if you're just talking about your pretend friend or something. The boy shook his head vehemently in denial. The Ichibi sighed and scrubbed his hair in frustration. He patted himself down for a pack of cigarettes, then cursed when he realized he was out. He sighed again, muttering curses under his breath. The kid waited patiently, watching unobtrusively. Shukaku twitched. Fine. Whatever. I'll let you come for now, since I owe you one, but once we get to the next village, that's it. You're on your own, he ordered, dusting off his knees. Got it? Gara grinned shyly. Yes sir. Shukaku grimaced, picked a direction, and started walking. Trailing a few steps behind, Sabaku no Gara happily followed. It was a few weeks later that a tired Kyuubi finally started to relax again. His talk with the eight-tailed snake had gotten him paranoid about the ninja, and now that he thought back on it, that was probably what the Orochi was aiming for.
The fox snorted as he thought about his fellow yokai. The bastard, he thought, shaking his head slightly, lip curling up in an angry sneer. He knows I've only grown this strong by making a lot of enemies, and then he goes and reminds me of the newest group. Chu-san. Hearing the little voice, Kyuubi blinked before looking down at Naruto, who was scowling at the demon. Chu-san, what do I do next? He demanded, hands still held in the last seal that he'd learned.
Tora for the tiger, then hold your fingers to your lips, and use them to aim. You should feel a pressure in your lungs. When you do, concentrate your chakra there, and in your throat as you breathe out, the fox explained, moving to the side. He doubted that Naruto would get so much as a wisp of fire on his first try, but the kid had a habit of surprising him. Not this time. The boy inhaled, and just as he was about to release the flames, he sneezed, and a few licks of fire shot out of his nose. Itai! Naruto yelped, holding his hands over his abused nose. Kyuubi chuckled slightly under his breath as he gently pulled the boy's hands away from his face. The fires hadn't been hot enough to cauterize, so blood was running down the boy's lip, and the fox shook his head at the child. Interesting technique, he chided, concentrating his yuki at his fingertips. Kyuubi wasn't a healer. That skill was more the gobi's strength, but he knew enough of the theory to patch up Naruto's sinuses. A deep red glow flowed over Naruto's face, and the boy's whimpering quieted as the skin knitted back together. Due to his lack of mastery of the technique, his yuki was flowing into Naruto, mixing with the boy's own chakra, and unknowingly strengthening it. Slowly, the boy was becoming more and more like a yokai himself. Finished. Kyuubi stood up again, the glow fading from his fingers. Feel better? He asked, red eyes glittering mischievously. Sniffling, Naruto nodded, rubbing his nose before spitting out a small mouthful of blood that had leaked down his throat. You want to try again, or switch to illusions? Illusions. The boy chirped, eyes bright at the thought of using the same technique his father had on Orochimaru. That and the fact that they were much safer. However, the training session was interrupted by a loud grumble. Kyuubi raised an eyebrow as Naruto grinned, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. Well, we did skip breakfast, the boy declared. The fox shook his head. Indeed we did, at your insistence, he reminded, steering the young human back towards the house. I wanted to learn. Besides, the boy pouted as he looked away, no one's come down the path since the snake guy. I want to prank someone. Kyuubi blinked in surprise, but refused to show any other reaction as he looked down at the youngster. Every day, the little human was acting more and more like a fox. He remembered what it was like as a kid himself. In a random act of boredom, he'd used a natural glue to stick his mother's tails to the ceiling of the cave they'd lived in. She'd tanned his hide for that one, but it had taken months for her fur to grow completely back in. At this point, he knew Naruto was getting antsy enough to attempt something on him. Tell you what, he offered, leaning over to look his son in the eye. After lunch, if you learn this new technique, I'll show you a village of humans to prank. As long as you're careful, he cautioned. At once, Naruto cheered, grabbing his clawed hand to pull him towards the house. Chuckling, the fox picked up the pace, striding smoothly after the boy. It was a few hours later, and Naruto was doing well with the new technique the Kyuubi had demonstrated. This one was the basic of all kitsune pranks, and one of the first a young fox would learn. Naruto was working on changing his form into a copy of Niba-san, and was doing a good job at it. Grinning to himself, the fox leaned against the post of the wall, watching as his son dispelled the illusion again. Good, very good, he purred, smiling lightly at the boy. You've almost got it down perfectly. He cocked his head to the side, nonchalantly. I think you might have earned a cha. He was cut off by a sudden sense of urgency from one of his hitodama, the little red flame. What is it? He murmured, turning towards the spirit. A mental image flowed before his eyes, and he let out a bark of surprise. Him? He's coming here? He barked, annoyed and relieved. Beside him, Naruto crossed his arms. Who? He asked, slightly annoyed that Hito-san had pulled his father's attention away from him. Scowling, the fox held a hand up, asking for Naruto to be quiet, before studying the image for a moment, his own natural curiosity as a fox kicking in. He looks rather worn out. Perhaps the child is the reason? He's never been a true fan of humans, so why is the child accompanying him in the first place? Looks almost like one of mine. Too young though, he looks to be Naruto's age. The fox grinned as he opened his eyes, looking back at his ward. Naruto, it seems that we have guests on the way, the kitsune said, his red eyes glittering wickedly. Before he could say anything else, the youngster grinned evilly and raced off, heading in the direction of the kitchen. Chuckling, Kyuubi leaned back against the frame of the door, waiting for the guest to show up. He didn't have to wait long. It was only a minute later that the bedraggled man came out from the trees, a small shadow behind him. Kyuubi forced his grin off his face, scowling at the younger demon. So, you finally show yourself to the rest of us, Shukaku, he intoned.
At once, the smaller Yukai turned large eyes on the elder, whimpering pathetically. Kyuubi-sama, help me. He begged, using rarely remembered honorifics to try and butter the fox up.
The fox raised an elegant eyebrow. And what did you do this time? The whimper was louder this time. It won't stop following me, he cried, pointing a thumb back at the small shadow. Curious, the fox turned to look at the child. A small boy, about Naruto's age like he'd seen earlier. A shock of bright red hair spilled over green eyes, and the small bear in his arms only added to the general cuteness of the kid. He was dressed as a member of Wind Country, all sand tones, and when Shukaku dared to look back at him, the boy smiled brightly, making him shudder. Smirking, Kyuubi turned on the tanuki. I see no problem, he said. As the younger demon gaped at him, the fox squatted in front of the boy, smiling as nicely as he could. So then, who are you? The boy smiled again, showing a gap in his teeth where a new tooth was just starting to grow in. Gara is Gara, he said enthusiastically. At a nod from the older redhead, Gara babbled on. Gara likes your forest. There aren't many ghosts, and it's much cooler here. Ghosts. Shukaku cut in at this point. He's a rare one. He can actually see the ghosts of those who've been killed violently, he offered, plopping down on the porch, fiddling with an old cigarette box he'd found in his sleeve. He didn't want to go home, so he followed me. Refused to stay at one of the outposts I went through, and now I can't shake him. He can actually see the ghosts? Kyuubi asked, looking back at the tanuki. Truly see them? The young tanuki glared up at the fox. We went through the forest, and he described 3 ghosts a few miles back. 2 men and a woman, about 5 years dead, and ranting about how it was supposed to be just a simple mission. Know anything about them? He asked. Grimly, the Kyuubi nodded. They sound like the ninja I killed a few years back, he admitted. Shaking his head, he turned to Gara again. Well, I should say that you are a special young human then. Much like my own son, he offered, smiling lightly. Shukaku looked up at this. Son? You have a son? He asked, worried. It was at that point that Naruto decided to introduce himself. There was a flurry of giggles, then Shukaku disappeared in a cloud of white. Coughing, the tanuki stumbled to his feet, wiping frantically at his eyes. Ignoring the raccoon, Kyuubi barked up at the roof. Naruto, recite rule number 3. A small blonde head popped over the roof edge, grinning from ear to ear. He was in trouble, but it was worth it. Never eat yellow snow, he called. Prank rule number 3. No pranks in the house, but it wasn't in the house, Naruto tried. The fox smirked as the Hitodama pulled the boy down to the ground. The porch is part of the house. It still counts. You know the penalty for breaking this one.
Naruto sighed. I'll get the mop, he whined, grinning as he trotted off.
Smirking, the fox shook his head at the boy before turning back to Shukaku, who was still spitting out mouthfuls of white. What he hit you with anyway? The raccoon grimaced as he spat again, much to Gara's amusement. Tastes like rice flour, he grumbled. Said flour hadn't spread evenly, so patches of color were peeking through, but he looked like a ghostly priest. Man, and I just got out of that stupid kettle. Like the dust wasn't bad enough, he muttered, trying to slap the flour off of him. Kettle? Kyuubi asked, eyebrow raised as he mentally ordered the Hitodama to start a bath for the tanuki. After a second, he ordered the last 2 to make something for Gara to eat as well. Come in, you can get cleaned up as you explain, he ordered before gesturing towards Gara. We'll get some food for you as well, Gara-kun, he offered. Smiling, the youngster wrapped a hand around Kyuubi's sleeve as the fox escorted the 2 into his home.
Naruto grumbled a few minutes later as he threw out a bucket of gluey water, finished with the mopping. Sighing, He passed the mop and bucket to the yellow Hitodama, who took it away. Hungry, the young human wandered into the kitchen, only to stop at the sight of the other boy. Gara was sitting at the table and munching happily on a piece of cucumber, giggling as he watched most of the Hitodama as they prepared the next meal. Seeing Naruto, the child of the sand grinned shyly as he waved.
Hi, he said quietly. Blinking, Naruto grinned after a minute, sitting down across from the smaller boy. He scratched at his cheeks. They felt a little weird ever since his father had healed him, but he wasn't too worried. Hi. So, you're called Gara, right? When the redhead nodded, Naruto just smiled as he grabbed a piece of cucumber for himself. I'm Naruto, he offered. Curiously, the little blonde tilted his head as he looked at the other boy. Where'd you come from? How long have you lived with that other demon? Which tail is he? Where does he live? Do you like pranks? What? Naruto, let us try not to drive Gara-kun insane his first day here with us, Kyuubi chided gently as he and Shukaku entered the kitchen, the raccoon in freshly laundered clothes, all traces of the flour gone. As he sat down next to his ward, the Hitodama floated over with a plate of inarizushi for the fox, and hanazushi for the boys. Grumbling, Shukaku ordered his own spirit to help out, one of the other sprites bringing him a flask of Masumi Arabashiri sake. Kyuubi scowled as the tanuki downed the alcohol in one go. A light blush dusting his cheeks already. Go easy on those, I've only got a few of them, he growled as another one floated over towards the younger demon. Ah, shut up, the smaller Yukai grumbled, leaning on the table as he started on the second flask. I've had a stressful past 50 years, okay? Let me get drunk in peace, he muttered, ignoring the giggles from the boys. Are you going to tell me what happened? Kyuubi asked, curling claws around his chopsticks, as if intending to stab the younger demon, despite how uncouth it would be. Rather not in front of the cubs, Shukaku muttered, motioning towards Naruto and Gara, who were watching the two demons as they munched on the hanazushi. Sighing, the fox summoned a pair of Hitodama, the red and the small yellow flames bobbing happily next to the boys. Naruto scowled slightly at the red sprite. He was the one that always tattled on him to Kyuubi. The yellow one was one of the younger ones though, and she tended to help the young human during pranks. Kyuubi stared at the two sprites, their impish faces peering up at him from within their flames. Take these two to the village nearby, and show them the secret way in. Stay out of sight, but keep them out of trouble, he ordered, much to Naruto's glee. He turned to look at the boys, and raised an eyebrow at what they were wearing. May I suggest that you loan Gara-kun something else to wear before you leave though, he ordered gently. Of course san. Naruto chirped, jumping up and dragging the young sandboy after him.
Well, now that they're gone, Kyuubi grinned slightly after the boys before turning to the tanuki. Mind telling me how you were trapped for the past 50 years? Or why you came to my province instead going to your own? He asked, completely serious. The raccoon sighed as he took another long pull of the sake. I can't go back, he muttered, saddened and angered at the thought. The humans took my province while I was trapped in that kettle. He gritted his teeth as claws sank into the clay of the sake bottle, cracks forming as he took the last swallow. I am not stupid enough to try and take out an entire ninja village, especially the same one that trapped me in the first place. He slammed the bottle into the table, destroying it. The raccoon ignored the ceramic shards that were embedded in his hand as he snarled at the world. The fox gave Shukaku a worried look, not for his injuries, but because of the unsettling news. They've taken your province? He asked softly. Most of it, including my home, the younger Yukai snarled. Opening his hand, he stared as the blood dripped down his palm, the shards sticking out of the skin. The humans turned it into an outpost at the edge of their territory, he said mournfully. He sniffled. All my porn, gone. He cried, only slightly serious. The fox gave him a perplexed look before shaking his head. And how were you captured? I don't know. He looked up to see the older demon glare at him. Seriously, I can't remember. The younger demon shook his head, absently playing with one of the shards in his palm. All I really remember is the pain from the first 10 years. Then everything went numb. About a year ago, I started sensing things outside of the kettle again, but I wasn't able to do anything, till the kid broke the seal, he exclaimed. The fox shook his head before grabbing the raccoon's hand. Look, you can stay here for a while, he offered, pulling the ceramic shards from the younger man's palm. All I ask though, is that you lay off the sake a little, all right? He scolded mildly. Sighing, the young Yukai shook his head. Thanks for the offer, but you can't keep me from my alcohol, he muttered. Kyuubi's eyes narrowed as he set aside the last shard from the raccoon's hand. At his mental summon, the green Hitodama brought him a paper fan. Narrow fingers wrapped around the paper weapon as the fox raised an eyebrow at the tanuki. Well, as long as you are living under my roof,
We shall work on a few habits of yours that are, shall we say, lacking, he stated. The boys giggled as they followed the dancing flames through the forest. Naruto had changed into a bright orange yukata, and young Gara was in a red yukata with black designs. Hito-san seemed to have taken to Gara, while the little yellow one was sticking with the fox child. Naruto had already dubbed this one Kokono Ka. Is it much further? Gara asked as they climbed over a log, following the brighter boy. They'd been following the Hitodama for the past 20 miles, the young sand child being carried by the sprites when he got tired. Naruto, used to stalking the forest with his two-san, had more stamina than the newest member to the demonic family. I don't think so. Look, Naruto chirped, pointing at a point of the forest. The trees had dissolved away a little bit ahead of them, and what seemed to be a wall of white stone loomed up ahead of them. The youngster turned to Kokono Ka, excited. Is that the village Tusan was talking about? He chirped. He cheered when the yellow flame bobbed up and down. Come on, show us in then. Up at the entrance of Konohagakure, Kotetsu sighed as he leaned against his desk, bored out of his mind. I had to get guard duty on the second war festival, he thought grumpily, leaning up to inspect the passes of a caravan from another minor village. While all the other shinobi get to have a little fun, I'm stuck here with Azumo-kun, taking care of all these tourists. He sighed again as the caravan passed, smiling at the little kids who ran screaming past into the ninja village. Hey, at least we don't have to deal with them. Kotetsu chuckled as his partner waltzed back up to the booth, holding a plate full of yakitori that he'd ninja'd away from one of the stands in town. Yeah, I know. I just wish that I could be in there anyway. It'd be more fun than checking paperwork and passports, he said as he took a stick. The bandaged ninja shrugged as he helped himself to a stick of chicken as well. I understand why the Hokage needs us to be here, but still, nothing happens during festivals, he insisted. Unknown to the two Chunin, two little boys had snuck through a hole in the wall. They had popped up right behind the booth, only to duck away and sneak in with the caravan. Naruto blinked a few minutes later as he and Gara ducked away from the tourists. I thought that would be harder, he said to his friend as they wandered towards the center of the village. Gara frowned as he tried to remember about his village. Gara thinks it's a festival. Gara's village was always more relaxed during festivals, he thought out loud. Festival? Like a party? Yeah, Naruto grinned wildly. Then let's go have some fun? But, I don't think I want to, Minato grinned as he shook his head at the little Uchiha. Come on Sasuke-kun. I know you don't want to stay with an old fogey like me for the whole day, he joked, helping the kid with his yukata. The Hokage had officially adopted the youngster, although he hadn't been planning to, and had been trying to help him get over the death of his family. He was also planning on training the boy later in his life, but he wasn't going to tell him that just yet. Sasuke frowned as he held his arms out, letting the Hokage tie his obi. The little Uchiha was in a dark blue yukata with his family crest on the back, held together with a white obi. A small hawk in white was printed on his sleeve. Do I have to? He asked softly. Of course. You'll have fun, I promise. I'm not going to kick you out of my shadow, but you should just go and play with some of the other kids, he said, giving the boy's obi a small tug as he secured the ends. The young leader wasn't in a yukata like the Uchiha, but his coat was freshly pressed, and his headband brightly polished. Besides, I was planning on meeting up with a few of the elders, and you don't want to be stuck with me in a boring meeting, do you? He asked, only to chuckle at the disgusted look on the boy's face. Sasuke may have only been living with Minato for a few weeks, but he knew well enough how annoying said meetings were by now. The boy sighed deeply before nodding. All right, he said in a small voice, pulling on his Geta sandals. Minato grinned as the two exited the apartment. I'll catch up with you later, okay? He pointed towards another child, one in a brown and green forest printed yukata. He looked bored as his mom pulled his short hair up into a ponytail, flinching every now and then when he thought she was pulling too hard. Why don't you go play with Shikamaru-kun over there? He suggested, giving the kid a small push towards the Nara pair. Rolling his eyes, the boy nodded before running off after the Nara. With a sigh, Minato turned towards the Hokage tower, bracing himself for a long day. In a different part of the village square, a young girl sighed as she wandered around the booths. Her father was busy with the other elders, and one of the other members of her clan was taking care of her newborn sister, as her mother was still not feeling too well. So, she had left the compound alone after getting her cousin to promise to join her later. The girl sighed again as she twisted her hands in her yukata, a pretty midnight blue with a wave pattern background. The obi was a pale silver blue, matching her eyes. She was nervous being alone, despite the fact that there were other clan members nearby. Movement from the corner of her eyes made her turn her head. A small mask was being pulled off a booth by an equally small hand. The owner of the booth was at the back of the small stand, wrestling with a box from the back of the cart. Even as she watched, The mask disappeared down towards the hand, only for a second mask to join the first a few seconds later. Curious, the little girl snuck over towards the booth, trying to see who was stealing masks. Peeking around the stand, she blinked at the sight of two boys her age, one of whom was holding the pilfered masks. Come on, we don't want to get caught with these, Gara-kun. Gara doesn't think we should just steal these though. But they were just lying out there, he was just asking for us to take them. Leaning out a little further, Hinata squeaked as she lost her balance, falling flat on her face. As one, the two boys turned to look at her, both with a wary look on their faces. The one boy had almost the look of a wild creature. The boy in the red and black yukata though, had the look of someone who knows that he's about to be turned away. Slowly, Hinata pushed herself to her knees, pale eyes wide as she stared at the strange boys. Her eyes were drawn to the one boy, bright and sunny, as he crawled towards the girl. Bright blue eyes stared into hers as he muttered, "Pretty." "Hey, what are you kids doing?" As one, the three children turned to look up at the man, who had returned to the booth, only to notice the stolen masks. The blond boy grinned widely as he turned to his companions. "Run for it," he barked as he dashed off, Gara and Hinata a few steps behind him. Rolling his eyes, the man sighed. That's what he got by coming into a ninja village. Giggling, Naruto ducked behind a building, Gara and Hinata right behind him. Grinning, the little boy leaned back against the wall, stolen masks in hand. "That was fun," he said, passing a stylized tanuki mask to Gara, pulling a smiling fox mask over his own face. Surprisingly, there was third mask in the blonde's hand, and he smiled at Hinata behind the plastic mask as he handed it to the young Hyuga. A bird looked up at the girl, and she blinked at the sight of it. She hadn't seen the boy steal this one. "So, what are we going to do?" The redhead, no, he'd called himself Gara, asked quietly. Hinata could sense the grin as the blonde turned towards his friend. The mask seemed to gleam mischievously in the dying sunlight, and the boy giggled. "We came here to have fun, right? So, let's go and prank someone," he declared, thrusting a tiny fist in the air. Kakashi twitched as he turned a corner, eye looking up from his newest trademark. The orange novel still had that crispness you get with a new book. Ever since the sun went down, he'd been getting the feeling that he was being followed, and even now, as he turned towards the middle of the festival, that feeling only got stronger. Since leaving the Anbu Corps, the years had been a little more kind to the 18-year-old. Do a few high-rank missions, visit his old sensei in the older man's ward when he had a day off, go to the memorial stone, train, and show up to meetings as late as he dared. Yeah, life was good. Still, just because he had left the ranks doesn't mean that his skills had diminished. If anything, paranoia made him even more of a threat. It meant that he was jumping at shadows, and becoming a threat towards cats, mice, and small children dwelling within. A scratching sound from the roof. The young Junin twitched violently towards the roof, hand reaching for a kunai. Even as he twirled, something wet and sticky splattered against the back of his head, drenching his sliver hair. Blinking, the Junin reached up to touch, only for a cloud of feathers to explode over his sticky spikes. Annoyed, he turned to look in a window, to see that he'd been honey and feathered. He looked like a chicken had exploded on him. Gingerly, he reached up to pull at a feather, only to hiss in pain. It wasn't honey, it was ninja crazy glue. The kind they use with exploding notes. He sighed as he released the feather. Looking up at the roof, he sighed. Only a small child could fit up there. "I need to train more," he muttered before heading towards his apartment for a much-needed shower. Up on the roof, the trio were laughing, surprised that they'd pulled that off. Naruto grinned as he looked over at Hinata. "Thanks for helping us get that glue." Gara couldn't help but grin as well. "Gara thinks it was a great idea to raid the chicken stand too," he giggled. Hinata smiled from behind the bird mask, timidly playing with a feather. I've never done anything like this before," she admitted softly. "Gara hasn't either," the young Sunanin chirped. "But Gara wishes he had before this." The raccoon mask smirked as the boy pulled a few things from his sleeve. A handful of large glass marbles. Naruto remembered them from his room back at the compound. "Gara thinks we should go do some more." It was a few hours later that Minato found himself wandering the festival, sighing as he stuffed his hands in the pockets of his trench coat. It had been a long and pointless meeting, with the elders getting in the way of all the more important issues. And then, there had been the old relic that was Danzo. The old man may be as sly and subtle as a fox, but it was obvious that he was following his own plan. The War Hawk had wanted the position as Hokage, but his injuries had dropped him from the running. Minato shook his head, banishing the old man from his thoughts. "This is supposed to be a happy event. I need to ignore them for now before I go crazy," he mused. One last detail ran through his mind as he watched a few children running around, playing with each other. Heishi had confided in him with his worries for his wife. The delicate Hyuga women had just given birth to a second daughter, baby Hanabi, but the current medic Nin at the hospital were proficient in field dressing type medicine, not the delicate healing needed for a birth. The few proficient medics had been knocked from the ranks, either due to fieldwork or retirement. One had even been recalled into the Oinin. As for Tsunade, she had helped to heal the boy from Orochimaru's lair, and then retreated to her life of drunken gambling. The young Hokage sighed as he turned to a dango stand, only to stop as he noticed one child tripping, falling hard on his front. Minato couldn't tell who the kid was. The fox mask completely covered his face. Minato grinned at the boy as he kneeled in front of the boy, ready to offer him a hand up. The boy, though, shrugged off the hand, groaning as he pulled the mask away. Bright blue eyes were squinted as he rubbed a sore nose, faint marks on his cheeks. But it was the grin, the same one that reflected back at him in the mirror in the morning, that startled the man so greatly. Minato was so startled that he barely moved as another boy called out, provoking the little blonde into flight. The world seemed to slow as the Hokage turned, only to gasp lowly as the two boys seemed to disappear into the dark, a third child following them. The blonde collapsed back against the wall, head spinning in shock. It can't have been.
What's the matter, sensei? Kakashi asked as he waltzed up, an illusion around his hair. The glue was proving hard to get out. You look like you've seen a ghost, sensei. Inexplicable tears were forming behind bright blue eyes as Yondaime blinked up at the young Junin. Kakashi-kun, I think I'm going insane. I swear, I just saw a kid, that could have been my son. He shook his head. I thought that I just saw Naruto again.
In the alley, Naruto gasped for a breath as he and Gara looked back at the older blonde. As Hinata raced up, Gara grabbed Naruto by the arm, pulling on him. Come on, we gotta go, he insisted. What's wrong? Hinata asked, pulling her mask off so she could be heard clearly. Gara looked up at the young Hyuga, eyes wide behind the tanuki mask. That's the yellow flash. Gara's father used to tell Gara stories about him. That he would come and take Gara away in the middle of the night if Gara was a bad boy. Hinata started to disagree with the young Sunanin, but Naruto cut her off. No, he's right, we should go. There's something about him that makes me feel strange, he said, biting his lip as he played with the mask in his hands. Go. But when can I see you again? Where do you live? And why haven't I ever seen you before? Hinata asked, fiddling her fingers together nervously. Naruto paused as he turned to smile at the young girl. Don't worry, I know where this place is now. I'll come back to see you again, he declared, holding his hand out in a fist. Pale eyes looked up from her hands. Promise? Naruto did even better than just saying yes. He leaned in and kissed her on the cheek before grinning again. I promise. Just watch for us, okay? Hinata could only blush as she watched the pair turn as run towards the forest, a pair of bobbing lights appearing next to their heads as they melted into the shadows of the forest of fire country. Kyuubi sighed as he leaned back against an armrest, rubbing his forehead. Ever since he'd allowed the boys to go into the human village a week ago, Naruto and Gara refused to talk about anything else. The fox was proud of the pranks they had pulled on the ninja, he would admit that, but after retelling the same story over 30 times, it tends to grate on your nerves. And now, this obsession with food. Across from him, Shukaku chuckled at the fox's dilemma, gorging on his own bowl of rice and some of the Kyuubi's best salmon. At his knee, Gara picked over a bowl of rice and trout, mentally agreeing with Naruto. It may be the best quality, but the demons seem to be happy living on bachelor recipes. Naruto sighed as he eyed Kyuubi's plate of inarizushi. Quick and tasty, but it was so simple, just fried rice parcels. He wanted something tastier, noodles and meat and egg and veggies and wakame. That was a high-quality meal to the youngster. He sighed again as he picked at his portion of rice and chicken. It's not that he didn't love his Tucson, he just wished he could offer some new recipes for the Hitodama. The fox rolled his eyes at the boy, jealously pulling his inarizushi a little closer to him. At this point, he was considering taking the boy out and training him in illusions until he dropped, if only to get a little peace and quiet. When did you get a chance to steal ramen? We didn't steal it, Hinata-chan bought it for us, Gara offered, playing with his food. Bought? Kyuubi snarled. Frowning, he put his chopsticks to the side as he sat up. Naruto, you know the rules. Never buy something if you can steal it instead. I went back and stole more later, the boy protested. Sighing, the fox rolled his eyes at the kid, slightly mollified. Just finish your meal, Naruto-kun, he chided. When you're done, go outside and show Gara-kun your new illusion or something, he ordered, waving his hand lazily as he popped another inarizushi into his fanged maw. Oh yeah. Gara-kun, hurry up, I gotta show you that one, it's so cool, he chirped, shoveling rice into his mouth, getting quite a bit on his face. Curious, The redhead copied the blonde, and a few minutes later, the two were out the door and practicing in the clearing. Shukaku smirked as he watched the two racing off. Are all humans this energetic? I don't know about you, but I was a quiet kid for a kitsune. What's the human phrase? Oh yeah, our pigs flying outside. Fwap. Ow. You will learn not to disrespect your host, Shukaku. Fuck you on your own tails, fuzzy, THWAPP. I've said it before and I will say it again. I can do this all day if needed. The two were interrupted from their pissing contest by the arrival of Shukaku's Hitodama, who was dragging a scroll behind him. Seeing it, the tanuki grinned as he accepted the scroll from the tired little flame. Finally, the rest of my stuff, he crowed, opening the sealing scroll. In it was a collection of the few things his Hitodama was able to retrieve or scavenge from his destroyed house and territory. A slight application of Yuki, and a Shikuho popped out. Grinning evilly, the demon twirled it, and swung at Kyubi, only for the fox to block at the last minute. Coolly, the fox flicked golden eyes up at the raccoon, arms still up and blocking the staff. Don't do that again, he intoned. Smirking, the tanuki relaxed, backing off from the attack. Just making sure you were paying attention, he said, eyes bright as he put the weapon away. He frowned a little, forehead furrowing. Does Gara even know how to use chakra? He wondered as he looked out at the boys. Outside, the boys giggled as Naruto helped show Gara the hand signs for basic illusions. How does Gara make this work? The redhead asked, green eyes bright. Naruto frowned, trying to remember how Kyubi had described the energy needed for any technique. Absently, he brushed bits of rice off the front of his bright orange haori. It's an energy, it rests in your tummy, he pouted before shaking his head. You gotta want it enough, you gotta force that energy out of your tummy and up through your hands. The little sand child frowned as he held his hands in the Torah sign. Concentrating, he grunted as he tried to force something out into his hands. Nothing happened, then, a tingle in his arms marched up through his bones and into his fingers. He yelped, breaking his concentration in surprise. Not too bad, for a first try. At the sound of the new voice, the boys twirled around, looking for the source. Naruto, being the one with the experience with demons, was able to sense the newcomer first. A pair of golden eyes glowed out of the shadow of the forest as the new Biju revealed himself. He was tall and elegant, all pale and white colors where the Orochi was all dark colors. Long silver hair pulled back by 5 combs. His robes were a pale silk, bordered in a dark red, with scenes of wolves playing woven into the fabric. The Gobi smiled lightly at the boys as they backed up away from him. The little blonde obviously knew what he was, but unlike most of the other Biju, the Gobi was neutral about humans, and even enjoyed being around children. No need to fear, he assured as he crouched in front of the boys. This one shall not harm you. Silver robes flowed around him as he sat down, the demon trying to act as harmless as possible. Curious, the boys inched closer to the man. Gold eyes glinted in amusement as they came closer, acting more like skittish cats than normal little boys. The little blonde was the first to get close enough to touch him, and as the child placed a hand on his sleeve, the dog stifled a frown at the growing whisker marks on the boy's cheeks. This one needs to have a talk with the fox, he thought as the redhead peered into his wide eyes. Who are ya, mister? The dog was brought back down to earth by the boy's innocent question. Blinking, he turned to the child who was grinning like he was privy to a good joke. This one is an ally of the Kyubi. If you would be kind enough to lead this one to him? He asked, knowing that would get the boy's attention. The little redhead was the voice of reason among the pair. How are we to trust you? Come on, Gara. If he meant to hurt us, he could have done it already. The bewhiskered child grabbed the Gobi by the sleeve, and grinned as he pulled the demon to his feet. Tuzan's this way, he offered, tugging on the expensive silk like a puppy at a tug rope. Stifling a smile, the dog allowed the child to pull him along, Gara following nervously. As they approached the house, the trio paused at the sound of a high-pitched yelp, followed by hysterical laughter. To the boys' amusement and the Gobi's surprise, Shukaku came skidding down the hall, hooting with laughter as he raced away, feet pounding on the wood of the deck. Snarling, Kyubi pounced out of the hallway in a crouch, clawed hands biting into the floor as he raced after the be-damned tanuki. The reason why was quite obvious. Shukaku had managed to chop a foot of hair off the fox, with the rest dyed a bright green. Of course, with the hair chopped off, it looked normal while the fox was in his human form. If he ever shifted again before it started growing back though, it would translate as a wide strip of fur being shaved off his spine, straight down his back. Shukaku cackled as he led the fox on a merry chase around the deck. Come on Fuzzy, it's not like it won't grow back. And then how long will the dye stay in? 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Hey, it's a permanent, at least it washes out of our fur. I'm going to kill you, eloquent as always, Kyubi-sama. At the sound of the gobi's voice, Kyubi came to a screeching halt, staring at the placid old wolf and the two giggling human boys. Any lesser creature, as in Shukaku, would have blushed. As it was, Kyubi just blinked before casting a quick illusion over his hair, hiding the color. Boys, get out of here, he ordered. When they looked at him curiously, he flapped a hand at them, urging them on. Go and play, I don't care if you go into the forest or the village, just get out of here. I'll send a hitodama when it's time for dinner. The gobi watched as the boys cheered before racing off, heading towards the village. Shukaku came padding back up as the dog approached the porch, slipping sandals off as he stepped up onto the polished wood. This one has much to discuss with you, Kyubi-sama, he intoned. Do you have any idea as to what you are doing to the boy? The fox shrugged as he led the dog inside, offering him a cushion to sit on as the hitodama slid back the shoji for a cross breeze. You know the story as well as the others. The kid has grown on me. Gobi snarled as he straightened his back, towering over the stronger fox momentarily. Unconsciously, Kyubi withdrew into himself, hands drawn up closer to his chest before snapping himself out of his own instincts. You are poisoning the child. What? Not the best of terms, but yes, have you ever had need to heal him? Once. He accidentally sneezed and blew fire from his nose. *SNRK*. How'd that happen? Shut up, Shukaku. Indeed. Kyubi-sama, the boy is now your true son. Let us give these three a moment to come to terms with this new twist. Okay. Time in. What? You have infused the boy with your yuki, effectively transforming him into a Hanyu. Biwahahahahahaha. Cool gold eyes turned to the tanuki who was rolling on his back, clutching his sides. And what do you find so amusing, Shukaku-san? Gobi asked dryly, ignoring the fact that the younger demon was still cackling. The circles that are beginning to form under the eyes of the sand child mark him as a true member of your family as well. That put a wrench in the tanuki's mirth. It was the fox's turn to chuckle at his expression as Shukaku stuttered at the healer. But I never tried to heal him. The old dog took a deep breath as the tanuki righted himself. Your yuki is not as contained as Kyubi-sama's, or even this one's. Just being in the same village as the boy seems to have been enough to begin the process. The orange child is farther along because of his close proximity to Kyubi-sama. Are you sure it's me, or could it be the ghosts keeping him awake at night? Wait, you know what happened to Shukaku? Kyubi barked, turning to the gobi. Gold eyes flicked over to the kitsune. A lack of visible yukai markings allows this one to pass himself off as an eccentric human. This one has learned much about Shukaku-san's fate. He turned to look at the now serious young demon. Do you not remember your fight? Shukaku tilted his head. I was in a fight? I don't remember much before Gara released me. The dog nodded as he plunged his hand into his sleeve, revealing 5 stripes on his wrist as he pulled out a scroll from the expensive fabric. This one has recorded what he has learned, but the basic story is this. Shukaku-san, one of your masquerades as a priest did not end well. Deep sigh. What did the idiot do? Hey, I repeatedly told you to stop pretending to be a monk, but you never listened, so it's your fault. Yes, it was Shukaku-san's fault. He fornicated with the daughter of a powerful priest. Shukaku, you didn't? Oh hell yeah, I remember that much at least. Hey, she was a sweet little thing in the sack. You. Complete imbecile. Oh, what was I supposed to do? Ask if she had any relatives who were spiritually inclined in the middle of doing her? Gentlemen, we do not need to fight amongst ourselves. From what this one has gathered, the priest learned of the tryst and sealed Shukaku-san in the kettle as punishment. Now is not the time for us to be discussing this, however. There's news on the humans of Red Dawn. They're short only 3 members. Soon, they will come after us. Kyubi huffed as he crossed his arms. We knew that already. Yamada no Orochi informed me of this a few months ago. I admit, the 7th member is new, but nothing for us to be worried over yet. The old dog growled as he bared fangs at the Yuko. Do you not see? If they plan to come after us, a child whom is of your kin will be a great asset to them. If only as bait. And do you believe that Gara-kun will stay as he is now? He shows great promise already. He will come into his powers. Do you not think that a warrior who can subdue our kind would not be held in high regard if word got out? Kyubi growled right back, Shukaku a half-second behind him. Even though the tanuki acted like he didn't care about the boy, he would admit later, under heavy influence of sake, that the child had grown on him. And what do you suggest then? Take them deeper into the forest and dispatch them? Our own kin, as you claim. The Gobi no Koko lifted his chin as he stared down the pair. No, train them, until they drop. They must be strong enough to defend themselves if this group ever catches wind of them. The dog sighed as he looked away. This one only hopes that you two are able to live together long enough to do so without killing one another. Sighing, Kyuubi stood up, shaking his head as he leaned against the doorframe, staring out into the forest. So do I, my old friend, he whispered. Seeing the Kyuubi distracted, Shukaku leaned in closer to the gobi. Hey, well, do you know what happened to Amiko? I mean, her family line, he asked in a hushed voice. The dog nodded to himself. Her last descendant is a ninja of the hidden sand, and although he has no spiritual prowess, his sister, Karora I believe, had the potential to be a great priestess before her death. The wind danced around the young girl as she sat in the forest outskirts, playing with her long hair. The dancing leaves in the trees around her, usually a balm for her soul after a hard day's training with her father, only seemed to mock her in their gay display. Nothing mattered anymore. Her mother. Hinata's thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps, of bare feet over grass, and she lifted her head slowly, pearlescent eyes blank as she whispered, Please, leave me alone. Naruto and Gara frowned at the sight of their friend. Only Gara was able to see the only other person in the forest with them, a pale form of a woman who looked a lot like Hinata. Years of hiding his abilities from his family kept him from saying anything at first as he and Naruto sat down next to Hinata, who had finally recognized the pair. The little blonde frowned as he craned his head to try and look the girl in the eye. Hey, what's wrong? Crying in earnest now, the little Hyuga leaned against the blonde, Gara gingerly placing a hand on her shoulders. My cousin, she died, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. She said she would be fine. That she'd be able to come home and play with me and my new sister. The boys looked at each other over her shoulders, helpless looks on their faces. What did they know about mothers or comforting a friend in this? Gara's eyes kept flicking to the ghost, who was crying as well, trying to comfort the little girl. I'm so sorry, my little girl. She whispered in a soft voice. Please, tell her I'm sorry. She says she's sorry, Gara parroted after a second. When the other two looked at him, the sand child blushed as he looked away for a minute, looking at the ghost. Gara, he has always been able to see ghosts. A painfully hopeful look rose in the young girl's eyes as she looked up. Is my cousin here? Is she a ghost? Really? Gara nodded as he started repeating what the older Hyuga was telling him in her soft voice. She says she wanted to come back, but it was just her time. She's only here still because of her love for you. He slowly took her hand. She wants you to help your Tusan with your little sister. Hinata scrubbed at her face, wiping away the tears. Of course I will, but the compound won't be the same without her, she promised. Then you'll have us out here, Naruto promised, grinning slightly as he held out a fist in promise. We'll come out here every day if you want us to. Where do you two live? I've never seen you before the other week. Hinata-chan? Is that you? Startled, both boys looked up in the direction of the voice before racing off into the trees. The Kyuubi had been mad that they had let themselves be seen by adults, and they didn't want to be punished for that again. Mostly because the fox had made them do laps around the clearing until they dropped. They waved to Hinata as they raced off into the forest, seconds before the new person came up. Minato smiled sadly as he came into the slight clearing, catching sight of the little Hyuga girl. He'd heard about her mother, and had a feeling he'd find her in here. Sighing, he plopped down next to her, offering an arm if she wanted to lean on him. Want to talk? He asked quietly. Surprisingly, the girl shook her head before giving him a watery smile. No, I think I'll be okay now, she said softly. That's good then, Minato offered. So, who are you talking to? Hinata giggled a little. Yurei. A laugh. I see, and what did the ghost say? Not to be sad anymore, and then he said he would come and visit me whenever he can. The merchant whistled as he directed his horse down the forest path. It was a lovely October day, crisp air and colorful leaves falling around him. Truly a great day to be alive. It was the sound of sobbing that made him pull his horse up, looking around for the source. A patch of bright blue on the side of the road caught his eyes, and he jumped down from the cart. He never noticed the soft thump of a young boy jumping down into the cart from the trees, nor the sound of him rustling through the wares. Miss, are you all right? He asked as he came up on the person. Bright blue eyes peered up at him, and the merchant blushed at the sight of the young lady. Golden blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her bust threatened to split her kimono open. Faint marks patterned her cheeks, like whiskers or fingernails. Oh sir, please help me, she whispered breathlessly, one hand steadying herself on the ground and the other one cradled under her bosom, pushing her pert breasts up. A pair of firm double Ds. That was a little too much for the man. The heaving breaths the girl was taking did interesting things to her chest. With a gurgle, the man fell backwards, conked out with blood flowing from his nose. The girl frowned at the sight as she straightened up. Well, that was a weak one, she muttered before standing up, absently pulling her kimono shut. Gara-kun, anything good in there? The sand child grimaced at the woman as he looked up. Naruto-kun, drop the illusion please, you're freaking Gara out. Blinking, the woman looked down at herself, only to smirk. She knew men loved this form for the bodacious tatas. It got Shukaku every time. With a flick of her hands, the illusion dispelled in a flurry of leaves, leaving behind the 8-year-old Naruto. Sorry Gara, he chirped as he jumped into the wagon. Gara grinned as he shook his head, pawing through the bags. No you're not. Pause. Vigorous nod. Yeah, you're right, I'm not. Gara rolled his eyes as he opened a sack, revealing an assortment of weapons. Oh shut up Naruto-kun. He poked. Besides, Gara found what we were looking for, he said, holding up a kunai. And candy. Naruto chirped, diving into a box of Pocky. We need to get the Hitodama for this. He grinned, a dozen sticks of Pocky already clenched in his teeth. The little sand child laughed before whistling for the Hitodama. Naruto may have been the stronger of the two, but for some reason, Gara was developing his demonic powers faster than the blonde. As such, while Naruto could call only one of Kyuubi's Hitodama, Gara was able to summon 4 in Shukaku's one little flame. Pass Gara some of that Naruto-kun. He chirped as a small swarm of spirits popped into the clearing, circling around the redhead as Naruto tossed him a box of Pocky. Naruto grinned as he passed the box to 2 of the Hitodama, the other 3 taking the sack of weaponry. Before leaving, the red flame bobbed in front of Naruto, who groaned as it squeaked at him. All right, we'll head home, he whined as he jumped out of the wagon. Gara sighed as he followed the other boy, giving the horse a pat on the leg before they disappeared into the forest, the little spirits carrying the candy and weapons. Nice to know they have their priorities straight. This is the 3rd merchant to be attacked this month. Something has to be done about this creature. Minato sighed as he shook his head. I know what's in the forest. It's just a Mononoke. It's harmless as long as you don't try to attack it, he argued, rubbing his forehead. Danzo frowned as he narrowed a single eye at the Hokage. It doesn't matter what you say. This time, weapons were stolen. This is much more serious than a few harmless pranks. The blonde sighed as he looked up at the old warhawk. If I hear about this again, I'll send out a team, but nothing until then, he bargained. A knock on his door gave Minato the excuse needed to politely kick Danzo out of his office as a pair of Anbu entered. Recognizing the masks of the pair, the young man sighed as he stood up, joining the pair. What happened this time? He asked begrudgingly. A fight with the Inuzuka boy, reported the one on his left, a young man with a lion mask. The other Anbu, an older gent with a monkey mask, shook his head as he flanked the Hokage. They were arguing over something trivial, and it came to blows after the Inuzuka made a comment about his family. Minato shook his head as he marched out of the office, the 2 assassins flanking him as he headed down. I'm not sure what to do with him at this point. I never started this many fights at his age, he muttered. Shishi glanced at him. He has too much energy. I say, start his training early. Give him more exercises than just the leaf one. The monkey shook his head at this. I agree to basic exercises, but any more than that and you will spoil the boy. He needs discipline. Like what Fugaku would have done, the blonde accused. What about the Nara? Isn't the boy friends with their son? So, laziness and apathy to the world, or the Yamanaka. Please Shishi, his daughter already has him wrapped around her little finger. I'd say closer to the Akamichi then. Love and the every now and then training session. The Hokage sighed as they exited the tower, headed on the roofs towards the academy. Maybe I should foster him to one of the outposts. Give him some training and no-nonsense discipline. The young lion laughed nervously as they jumped from a flower shop to the roof of a bakery. Are you sure about that? He asked. He had been assigned at one of the outposts during his Chunin years, and because of that, he considered Anbu to be a vacation. I really don't know anymore. I guess I'll have to see. The young blonde forced a smile on a few minutes later as he walked into the office, the Anbu waiting for him outside of the academy. His ward was sitting in front of the desk, nursing a slip lip and black eye, while his teacher was behind the desk. Iruka smiled as he stood up, joining Minato. The young man had grown in the past 8 years into a fine young Chunin, and the Hokage was proud to have him as a teacher of the next generation of shinobi. Hokage-sama, I'm glad you could come on such short notice, he offered, placing a hand on Sasuke's shoulder. The young boy stiffened under his touch, but didn't say anything as the Chunin continued. We've already had a talk, so you can just take him home now if you want. Minato nodded as he gestured for Sasuke to stand, eyes disappointed as he looked down at his ward. Thank you Iruka-kun. I'll talk to him as well, but he'll be back by Monday. Thank you Hokage-sama. Iruka smiled brightly as the blonde exited, Sasuke sulking at his side. Outside of the academy, the two Anbu hid themselves on the roofs as the pair walked back to Minato's home. He insulted my father. Minato shook his head as he looked down at the young Uchiha. That doesn't mean you can attack him. Sasuke-kun, prove that you are the better man next time and don't hit him, he lectured. The young boy pouted as he looked up at the blonde, but he called my father a coward, just because. Because he killed him, he wasn't a coward, was he? No, Itachi-kun was just insane, Minato offered, placing a hand on Sasuke's shoulder. I don't know if his duties as Anbu captain drove him to insanity or if it was something else entirely, but from what I know, Fugaku-san was not a coward. A coward wouldn't offer his own life to try and save his wife like Fugaku-san did. He grinned as they turned to his house, a small two-floor place that had a large plot of land in the back for training. Now, shall we have lunch first, or do you want to train a little? A grin spread across Sasuke's face for the first time that day. Can we get something with tomatoes? Sure. How about that pasta stuff from Iwa? I heard it's pretty good. It was later that night that Minato found the file. His secretary had been sick, so he had sent her home for the night. He had been filing an S-class scroll, when he had come across a file with the title, Housekeeping. Curious, the young man poked through the file, noting the date to be only a few years old, just short of 3. Blue eyes went wide as he skimmed through the file, the blood draining from his face. Quite a few important names popped out at him, and a hoarse whisper grated past his throat. Oh please, no. In a flurry of wind and dust, he vanished from the office, to confront one of the names on the list. Sarutobi laughed as he played with his 4-year-old grandson. The little boy had stolen one of his hats, a wide conical straw hat, and was pretending to be the Hokage, just like Grandpa. When the knock came on the door, dusting his knees off, he rose from the floor to open the door, only to blink at the sight of Minato standing there. What can I do for you, Yandaime-sama? We need to talk, Minato said tersely, holding up the folder so that the codename could be clearly seen. Sarutobi paled at the sight, but nodded as he let the younger man in, asking for a minute to put his grandson down for the night. But Grandpa, I'm not sleepy yet, Konohamaru whined, only to yawn as the old man picked him up. I beg to differ, little one. Now, say good night to the nice Hokage, and let's get you to bed. Yawning again, the little boy waved at Minato from over the man's shoulder, the straw hat falling from his hand as they headed for his room. Upset, Minato paced in the living room, angry that this information had been kept from him. A few minutes later, Sarutobi came back, grim as a man facing the firing squad. Why wasn't I informed about this? Minato barked, throwing the file to the previous Hokage. I think that this is vital information on my village. Sarutobi sighed as he looked in the file, confirming its contents. You weren't in the village the night this was compiled. You were inspecting the outposts to the northwest, on the Kusa-Iwa border. Itachi would trust this information with no one else but me. Then why wasn't I informed when I got back, or even the night of the massacre? By the time you got back it was too late, and Itachi had already started the massacre. We couldn't tell you afterwards because of your attachment with the boy. Sarutobi sighed as he shook his head. I know you too well, Minato. If you had known, you would have told Sasuke-kun, even though a little boy of 5 doesn't need to know that his family was not what it seemed. I want told because of my personal life? Minato asked softly. Blue eyes were icy as he looked up at the older man. Am I not a shinobi? Do I not know how to keep secrets? Your excuse is a load of crap, Sarutobi-san, he growled. It wasn't simply my decision to make. Homura and Kaharu overruled me and had it classified as a S secret, Sarutobi defended. And yet I just happened across it as I was filing a scroll? Minato retorted, ignoring the fact that the file had been with the other S-class scrolls and files. He sighed as he turned away, starting to feel guilty from the wounded look on the old man's face. So, now what? You know we cannot let Sasuke-kun know. It would devastate him. Sarutobi's eyes went flinty as he approached the young Hokage, gently pulling the file closed as he handed it back to him. As far as the rest of the village knows, the Uchiha were massacred unjustly, and Itachi is an S-class Nukenin. Nothing more, and nothing less. Clashing metal rang through the clearing as the boys practiced behind the house. Gara and Naruto were enjoying the new weapons they had stolen, and were practicing their accuracy, using some of Shukaku's porn as the targets. Say goodbye to the books and blow up, doll, you pervert. On the porch, Shukaku growled as the boys giggled, another hole being ripped into his newest book, the first of the Icha Icha series. Kyuubi smirked as he pulled the rope tighter, hog-tying the tanuki. The younger demon had his arms tied to his sides at the upper arms and the elbows, and then his forearms together behind his back. His legs were tied together at the thighs, knees and calves, with his ankles pulled up to connect them to his wrists. This is for your own good, Shukaku. Porno is a perversion against nature, and you know it. It draws away from the beauty of the real thing. Murthered for FFCX. Now, no talking with the ball gag in your mouth. Nasty habit that. Kyuubi chided absently before instructing Naruto to keep his elbow up. Obeying, the boy threw another kunai, to have it go right between the eyes of the blow-up doll. With a pathetic whine, the doll deflated, hanging limply by the knife through her head. Nice shot, Naruto-kun. Gara chirped as he threw a shuriken at an erotic poster. The sharp metal ripped through the woman's chest, taking off half of it, much to Shukaku's dismay. Gold eyes turned pleadingly up at the fox, who just smirked as he motioned for the boys to pause. It's time for fresh targets, boys. He chirped sadistically, suppressing a laugh as Shukaku moaned in anguish as more books and a few adult toys were propped up, a whip, some toys, and a few others that really do not bear repeating. Looking at one, Naruto turned his gaze up to Kyuubi as he pulled the kunai from the blow-up doll. The plastic fell to the ground with a pathetic flop. Tucson, please don't let Gara and I grow up to be like Shukaku-san, he pleaded. The fox grinned as he approached one of the aforementioned items. I will tell you what, Naruto-kun, if you can put a kunai right through the X, he started, scratching an X through the toy, then I can promise you won't be like Shukaku-san, alright? Okay. And with that happy note, Naruto and Gara went back to their practice, happily slinging away, trying to be the first to hit the X, and therefore, the first to be safe from perversion. MGNRRKLLYRRFFCX. You can try Shukaku, and I will defeat you as easily as I did the first time. No sand here for you to use this time, Tanuki. Kyuubi smirked as he sat down on Shukaku's shoulders, crossing his ankles as he watched the boys. A Hitodama drifted up with a dish of sake, and the fox grinned as he took it delicately, sipping from it as he watched the boys destroy the Tanuki's porn collection. Very mature, Kyuubi-sama. At the new voice, Naruto grinned as he dropped the last kunai. Ni Obasan, he yelled, racing up to the cat. Smiling, the woman crouched to accept the hug, squeezing him to her as he jumped into her arms. It's been forever, Ni Obasan. The cat laughed as she stood up, balancing Naruto on her hip as Gara joined them. It's only been a few months, Naruto-kun. She teased, offering her free arm to Gara. She had met the Sand Child a few months after he joined the two bachelor demons, and had taken him in as another nephew. It still feels like forever, Gara chirped as he hugged the cat's arm. The Nibby laughed at this as she walked up to the porch, Naruto sliding down to his feet. Seeing the Tanuki, the woman slowly smirked. My Shukaku, are we a little busy? You look a little tied up at the moment. FCCKYRR, not if you were the last male in the elemental countries, she primed, turning her nose up into the air. At her side, the boys giggled at the murderous look on the Tanuki's face. Smirking, the fox slowly eased himself off of the younger demon's shoulders, passing the empty sake dish to a Hitodama. Have we learned our lesson, Shukaku? He asked, hand on the ropes around his ankles. Grinding his teeth against the gag, the young raccoon nevertheless nodded, wanting out of the bindings. For crying out loud, he couldn't feel his thighs anymore. Red eyes were mocking as all the fox did was unclasp the ball gag. Gagging, the Tanuki spat it out, working his jaws to loosen the sore muscles. Release me, you son of a bi. He stopped as the gag was shoved back in, locked into place by his fangs sinking into the rubber.
I see you've yet to learn how to respect your betters, coon dog, Nibby chirped as she viciously dug her clawed toes into his back, shredding the back of his monk robes. Snarling around the rubber ball, the youngest demon thrashed as best as he could, trying to get his teeth out of the toy.
Kyuubi grinned as he pulled the demon up, releasing his ankles so he could balance. Boys, it's time to practice illusions, he called, pulling the Ichibi to the post where the boys had been target practicing. With the swift fluid motions that spoke of much practice, he secured the younger man to the post, giving the boys free rein over the resilient demon. When they had protested, saying they didn't want to hurt the younger demon, the fox just assured them it would prevent them from falling into perversion later in life. Of course, this convinced them. Nodding, the fox gestured for the cat to follow him, kicking his sandals off as they entered the house. You're early this time, Nissan. I didn't expect you for at least another month, Kyuubi mentioned as he sat down, the cat taking a plush rug in front of him. Yeah, well, I heard a few disturbing rumors that I had to talk to you about, she offered, rubbing her arms. Red eyes flicked up at the cat. By now, the information on Akatsuki should have been passed to all the other Biju. That was one of the reasons he had the 9 Hitodama, so that he could spread word to the others fast. What is it, Nibby? She looked away, suddenly nervous. I've heard that, he is back. Kyubi flinched, understanding why the cat was so nervous. He was to the Biju what the Biju were to humans. A man who had the power to control the demons, to force them to bend to his will. He shook his head, remembering his own encounter with the demon of a man. He was easily put under the man's control, and if it hadn't been for his Hitodama, he would have been forced to do what the man wanted. That had been about 8, almost 9 years ago. It had taken the sacrifice of his youngest Hitodama to shake the control over him. Kyubi shook his head as he looked up at the Neko. If he was back, I'd be the first he'd come after. Remember what happened last time? He'll want revenge. A rare smile tweaked across his face as the pair ignored the screams for mercy from outside. He may not be the most loving of demons, but the fox understood why the cat was so nervous. He patted her hand gingerly as he looked her in the eyes. Even if he is back, I doubt he'll come after you, he tried to comfort. The cat suddenly puffed up. What, am I not good enough for him? Am I not powerful enough to tempt him? She hissed, hair bristling at the fox. At once, the man backed off, ears pulling back. You don't vex a cat, and a woman even less so. No, nothing like that. He'll just be wanting to go for a heavy hitter. 6 tails and up. Oh, so I'm not strong enough to count? Me, a Nekomata? The queen of the manipulators of the dead? I'm not good enough? If I see this guy, I'll tell him to go after you instead. The cat froze for a second, her tails puffing under the illusion before turning around, only to see the now very ragged Shukaku, with his sleeve around his legs, his sandals still on, and his pants missing. Kyubi smirked at the youngest demon. Well, I see you got out of the restraints faster this time, he smirked. Kill. You. As I said, you can try. The Tanuki's eye twitched as he pointed at the cat. I am going to go put some pants on, before I have to deal with you. Nibby giggled as she looked at him, holding her fingers close to each other over her mouth. A bit cold, Shukaku. She teased, eyeballing the human-style boxers the demon preferred. Shukaku did nothing, only flipped the cat the bird as he shuffled on past, his tattered sleeve dragging on the floor, sandals tapping as he retreated. The fox sighed as his Hitodama fluttered about, already cleaning the mud and dirt left by the rude house guest. I swear, I need to neuter him, we'd all be so much happier afterwards, he muttered, rubbing his forehead. I'll hold him down, and you can use the knife. As the two argued, they never noticed the boys racing into the house, or the flash of orange out in the trees. It was a few days later, in the pouring rain, that a stranger came to the clearing. Dark hair draped over red eyes, plastered down by the rainfall, and a thin mouth was pulled in an evil grin as he pulled an orange mask away from his face, revealing flawless pale skin. Dark armor glistened in the rain, and dark eyes were steady as he approached the villa. Dark spiky hair was lying flat from the rain, and as he came to the door, a pair of the Hitodama swirled around his head for a second before disappearing back into the house. It's been a long time, Kyubi. Red eyes flicked up, but never went past the man's neck as the fox glared from the shoji door. Not long enough, Madara. Black eyes were filled with dark amusement as the man cocked a head to the side. Now, I think you're not pleased to see me. After all, it's been 9 years since we last talked. Kyubi swallowed back a growl as he gracefully eased himself to his feet, dark red flame-patterned robes trailing on the floor. The demon markings on his cheeks darkened in his anger, and the Hitodama retreated farther into the house. I'm not pleased to see you. Last we crossed, you attempted to force me to bend to your will. A negligent shrug. All in the name of good business, you understand that, right? Water flew as he shook his head, still out in the rain. He didn't attempt to enter the house. The fox was on a hair trigger at the moment, so if he even tried he'd be attacked. But ancient history isn't why I'm here now. The time is coming. It will never happen. I will kill myself before allowing you to control me again. Oh, naive little demon. You are not the only one I want. I'll need all 9 of you before the end. The growl wasn't held back anymore, but if your goal is what I believe it is, you do need all 9 of us in order to summon your creature. I will take myself out of the equation before giving you a chance. But you have weaknesses. Ways to manipulate even the strongest of wills. I have heard rumors about a Mononoke in the forest. One that attacks the road near here, and looks like a small child. Red eyes were steady, but that immortal heart squeezed at the mention of his adopted son. Seems Naruto wasn't being as careful as he should. A casual shrug of the shoulder. I have also heard of a well-endowed woman doing the same. Doesn't mean anything. What is surprising is that a spirit is doing this on your territory, and you have yet to kill it. Either it is you, which I truly doubt, or you know the spirit itself. Leave my territory. Attempt to kill yourself, and I will find this spirit and kill him myself. You will not touch him. Oh, so it is true. You will not touch him. You know my terms. Swear it, on your eyes, that you will not touch him, and I will stay here. I will not run, hide, or take myself out. Kyuubi dared to look E-Man in the eyes, which were still black as coal. Do it, and leave. Madara smirked as the rain began to lift, a mist rising from the ground. On my eyes, I will not harm anyone as long as you are still here when I come again.
Deeper in the mansion, the Nibi, who had yet to leave, sat shivering in fear at the sound of the Uchiha's voice. Despite all the bug talk of a few days ago, she was truly terrified of the man out there. A cat prides herself on her control over herself and her environment, and being under the ninja's control just once was enough to shake her world.
That had been many years ago, and Kumogakure still had legends about her attack. It was sheer luck that Shukaku wasn't on the property. The Tanuki had left earlier in the day to steal cigarettes from a nearby post. The youngest demon was the only one who hadn't been under Madara's control before, and knowing him, he would have attacked the Uchiha, and learned the folly of his ways the hard way. She cowered as Madara's voice floated through the air again, part of her ashamed of her weakness, but the rest of her subconscious was begging for mercy. A whimper tried to force its way from her throat, but her pride managed to hold it back. The soft patter of feet caught her ears, and she looked up to see Naruto and Gara peeking out from around a corner. At once, they rushed to her, Gara nervous about the Uchiha himself, and Naruto scared about how his father figure was acting around the ninja.
The blonde looked up at her from her embrace. What's happening? He asked with all the worry and fear of an 8-year-old boy. Next to him, Gara shivered as he buried his head in the Nibi's embrace as Madara gave a sharp retort. He didn't even need to see the man, his growing powers as a priest told him that this man was not to be trusted in the least.
The cat took a shuddering breath as she clutched the boys closer to her. That man is all that we fear, more of a demon than we demons ourselves. He represents all that we fear, because he is the only one who can control us. She pulled back a little as she looked the boys in the eyes. You must never go against a member of this man's family, never fight an Uchiha. Earnest green eyes looked up at the amber eyes of the cat. How can we tell if they're an Uchiha? The eyes. If their eyes are red with black circles and marks, they're members of the Uchiha clan. As soon as you know they are, never ever look them in the eyes. Look anywhere else, but the eyes. Mizuki cackled as he launched himself through the trees, the forbidden scroll, the scroll of seals, securely fastened to his back. His original plan to trick any failure to steal the scroll for him had failed, mostly because everyone, even the lazy Nara boy had passed, but his lord needed the scroll, and the rewards would be beyond his imagining. It made the effort and risk to steal it himself worth it, and now, he was home free. As long as he kept moving, the Anbu wouldn't be able to find him before safely reaching the land of rice. He sneered at the thought of the Yondaime. That blonde upstart, he didn't deserve the hat. His master was the strongest shinobi from Fire Country, and when he had been denied that which was rightfully his, well, the Chunin couldn't blame his fleeing Konoha. An act that the man was replicating now. Only to stop suddenly. It wasn't of his own design, oh no. If he had a choice, he would have raced all the way to Otogakure. But the sudden snap of a rope and an unexpected flight upward effectively halted his retreat to the border as he ascended into the canopy by his ankle. Even as he prepared to use Kawarimi, he was out of practice from years as a teacher. He was stopped as a solid mass of ropes swarmed him, wrapping around the man until he was cocooned, hanging from the tree like a silver and tan fruit. Before he could even think about struggling, the world went dark. It seemed like only a second later for Mizuki, but it was a few hours later that the Anbu found him. He had been propped up against a tree, most of the ropes gone but for the ones that tied his hands behind his back. His uniform changed into a pink sundress, and his hair dyed a lurid neon green. Paint was on his face, forming a swirl that was becoming iconic with Mononoke victims, and to the horror of the village, the scroll of seals was missing. At this point, the spirit had gone far enough. Minato ordered a search of the forest, searching for either the scroll or the spirit itself. For nearly a month, the Anbu scoured the forest surrounding their home, and found nothing more than a few old traps, some by stepping in them. They got a lot more cautious after the second time someone had paint dumped on them, and after the first time one of their number had been infested with lice. And the remains of a few kills, human and animal alike. But no scroll, and no hint of the spirit itself. Hinata grinned to herself as she packed her bag. It was a month after graduation, and the Yondaime had just granted a joint C rank between Team 8, her team, and Team 7. The only reason they were together on this one was because it was a small caravan that needed an escort back to Wave. The Hyuga girl shook her head. The reason they were able to take this mission so early in their careers as ninja was because the Uchiha had raised a fit, saying that he was tired of useless D ranks that held back his strength. Team 8 were coming back from weeding a garden at the time, and Kiba had chimed in as well, threatening to eat the Fire Lady's cat if they had to chase it again. That had amused the blonde, and he decided to humor them with an easy C rank. The man they were escorting was an old bridge builder and his caravan of materials. The girl sighed as she looked out towards the forest. She hadn't seen her Mononoke friends ever since graduation and she was worried that they were hurt or dead somewhere. But outside of in the forest, she didn't know where they lived, so she was unable to visit the past 4 years. They had been a constant in her life, outside of their growing wildness and strength. Another sigh. There was no time to wonder about her friends now. The bag was thrown over her shoulder, the last of her weapons stored in her kunai pouch. A tweak on her hite aid and a shift of her fishnet under the jacket, and she was ready to go. She tilted her head back as she stepped out of the compound, soaking up the sun for a minute before racing for the east gate. Kurenai's sensei promised to be there within the hour, and the girl refused to let the older woman down by being late. It was only a minute to get to the gate, and she was happy to notice that she was the first of her team there. She grinned as she brushed a hand across her sleeve, touching the flame symbol, a secret tribute to her friends, and she settled in next to her sensei as they waited for the rest of the ninja and their client. Tucson, can we go on a vacation please? A vacation? When you still have more to learn from that scroll? We can take it with us, please, it's been forever since we left the forest. The Kyuubi sighed as he stared down the little boy. Naruto was pouting at his father figure, hands on his hips. Gara was next to him, just as serious as his friend and almost brother. Red eyes were curious as he cocked an eyebrow at the pair of 12-year-olds. All right, what brought this on? A sheepish look from both boys. The older boy looked back at Gara for a second, hand sneaking behind his back to something behind him. Do we need a reason? We've been cooped up in the clearing since we stole the scroll. The ninja have backed off, but we're still bored, Naruto argued. The fox had to admit, the boy had a good point, they were all a little stir-crazy in the mansion. But the demon was still suspicious. The slight flicker behind Naruto's back was enough to catch his eye. With a raised eyebrow, he gently pushed his son to the side, to reveal a sea-blue hitodama. The little spirit wavered in embarrassment before, waving, at the Lord of Demons. The Sanbi? Gara frowned as he stepped up again. We haven't seen Sanbi Jisan in years now, and Gara has never seen his lands. And he hasn't visited us since we were 10, can we go Tucson? Kyuubi paused, and then sighed. Well, I guess I can suffer a few weeks on the beach for you too, he joked lightly. Only to go blank as Shukaku raced out in glee, posing for the others in a pair of sand-colored swim trunks. The lack of shirt and pants reveled the series of blue marks that decorated the tanuki's skin. To the beaches, sand, surf and sun, and of course, the hot ladies. A rakish grin. Let's go already. The boys laughed at the younger demon as they ran off, going to pack a few bags of clothes and other needed items, leaving the demons alone. At a thought, 2 hitodama raced off as well, to put together a pair of scrolls for the demons. Kyuubi rolled his crimson eyes at the boys' antics, taking in their appearances. The 12-year-olds were up to his chest in height, and had added a lot more muscle to their small frames. Neither had cut their hair since they were 6, so both were looking a little wild. The fox made mental plans to get them a trim soon. As it was, Gara had his tied back in a long ponytail, with 2 layers of ties in the hair, while Naruto had tied it back, then sectioned it off into 3 tails. Both were in tunics. Gara in red and black, while Naruto was in orange and blue. Blindingly bright orange. And bright light blue. The combination was rather jarring. The thing that was a little strange was that both boys were much more tactile than the demons. The Gobi, being the resident healer, theorized that it was because neither child had been held or touched enough as babies, and instinctively, they were trying to make up for it. Naruto wasn't as bad as Gara, because while the hitodama weren't the most substantial, they could still interact with the little human, and the Kyuubi had been there to take care of him. He had also had his father before, but the man hadn't been able to take care of his own child as much as he would have wanted. But the little sand child hadn't been abused as much as just ignored, and had grown up with minimal contact until he released Shukaku from his prison. Red eyes flicked to the Ichibi at the thought. The fox had suspected a few things about the boy's lineage, and some of it had to do with the demon before him. The young sand child had only joined them after the age of 5, and yet was already changing into something similar to a Hanyu. Naruto had been with him since he was a babe in arms, and was at the same level. Considering the time differences, the redhead was growing at a faster rate than the little blonde. Or at least, he should have been, but recently, they had noticed the boy having to work harder to get the same increase in his chakra. It was very small. They doubted the boy really noticed yet, but the Biju could see it, and knew the boy would cap off in strength in a decade or so. Everything has their limits. Some just go farther than others. A few seconds later, the boys returned, dragging stuffed bags with them as they smiled up at their father figures. He chuckled at the sight of a pair of orange trunks sticking out of Naruto's bag. Can we go now? Naruto chirped. The fox smirked as a Hidadama came up with a scroll filled with clothes and supplies. Of course we can. He intoned, tripping the Ichibi as he danced by him. With a whoosh of air, the tanuki landed hard on his stomach, the wind knocked out of him. The little sand-colored Hidadama had a scroll for his master, so the fox ushered the boys to the door. Grab your sandals, and let's head out, he called, tying his own sandals on. He brushed a little dirt off of his outfit, a crimson pair of hakama and a burgundy haori with a fox playing on his sleeve. Shukaku will catch up to us when he puts his clothes back on, he called as he joined the boys. Kiba yawned as he stretched, trotting beside the caravan's left flank. Akamaru snuggled in closer to his neck, wrapped up in the lowered hood of Kiba's jacket. The little pup was worn out from a hard training session earlier, so his partner didn't mind him getting a little extra sleep. It had been boring, the past day. The old man's caravan consisted of him, a few villagers from Wave, and of course, the wagon of metal columns needed for the bridge itself. They had traded pre-cut wood for the metal, all of it hard woods that were harder to find in the land of pines and other soft-wooded trees that made up Konohagakure no Sato. Soft woods could be used to build, but hard woods like the type Tazuna had were much preferred, and used in framework. The ninja sighed, stepping over a puddle in the road. Only to frown as a wisp of a scent tickled his nose, the smell of men, blood, and metal oil. Around his neck, Akamaru stirred as he sensed his partner tensing up, looking around as he sat up, paws balancing on his neck. Small nose went into overtime, but when they were able to pick anything else up, they jogged to catch up with the rest of the caravan, ignoring Kakashi-sensei, who was bringing up the rear. And that was when Kakashi died in a shower of gore. Spread out. Kurenai barked, pulling a kunai from her pouch. At once, the genin followed her orders, fanning out to protect their assigned posts. Akamaru jumped down from Kiba's head, growling as he joined his human, and Shino started humming as his colonies came to life, a thin haze forming around him as the bugs started to spread out. Red eyes flicked about as the last sensei stayed on alert. The second their foes came back into focus, she flipped through a series of signs, pulling up a genjutsu. It was a pair of fighters in black, with water breathers and metal claws. Dark eyes flicked up, taking in their opponents in seconds as they clicked metal claws ominously. One down, they growled together, before racing after the frozen Tazuna. Only to be stopped by a pair of clan members. Sasuke and Hinata may not like each other, but they worked together well as they double-teamed the Chunin. A kunai to block the claws, curved fingers striking at chakra points, a whirlwind of dark hair and metal as the pair distracted the Chunin long enough for Kurenai's genjutsu to kick in. Hinata panted lightly as she inspected a tear in her dark blue jacket, a near miss from poisoned claws. Behind her, Sakura was racing up, calling out to the Uchiha as she abandoned her post. Luckily, Sai, Shino, and Kiba remembered their jobs, and kept on alert around the caravan as Kurenai tied up the demon brothers. Sasuke-kun, Hinata-chan, good job, Kakashi chirped as he reappeared from the trees. Blinking, the genin turned to look back where he'd been killed, only to see pieces of shattered branches. Kawarimi. I'm sorry if I worried you, but I needed to see who they were after. A lazy eye turned to stare down Tazuna, who had staggered back to lean against the caravan. The other civilians tensed at the look in Kakashi's eye. I think you have some explaining to do. As Tazuna explained the rest of the story, Kurenai came up to make sure Hinata was all right. They didn't injure you, did they? She asked, inspecting the tear in her jacket. And not even a scratch, Kurenai-sensei, she offered, pale eyes relieved that the fight was over already. That was an interesting fighting style you were using. When did you start modifying your family's style? A blush. Hinata hadn't meant to use that style, she was still trying to integrate Gara and Naruto's style into the Hyuga style, but it was becoming second nature to fall back into the more deadly combination of claw and chakra. I have two friends from the forest. We've been training together for many years and now, she offered, trying to skirt around the issue. She didn't want her friends to get in trouble by telling Kurenai too much about them. It was also because of them that her stutter had lessened, so it only bothered her every now and again. Kurenai nodded at the information, knowing better than to push. If the young heiress wanted to tell her more, she would come to her to do so. Everyone, Kakashi called, voice light despite the situation. At once, the ninja converged, quickly and quietly. This has just been upgraded to a B rank at least. Wave doesn't have the money at the moment to pay for anything higher than a C rank, but it's up to us if we want to continue the end. Thanks for watching, also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.